You made a mistake coming here. Those were the first words Clara Whitmore heard when Ethan Crowley opened the door of Red Hollow Ranch. She'd traveled 800 miles as a mail-order bride, carrying everything she owned in a single canvas bag. But the man glaring at her from the doorway claimed he'd never sent for her at all. Someone had lied. Someone had used her. And now she stood in the middle of Wyoming with nowhere to go. Stay with me until the very end to discover how a woman with nothing became the one thing this broken ranch couldn't survive without. Hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far Clara's story travels across the world. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in a cloud of dust so thick Clara could taste the grit between her teeth. She'd been tasting it for 3 days now, ever since leaving the rail station in Cheyenne, bouncing across rutted trails that seemed designed to shake a person's bones loose from their body. Her spine ached. Her fingers were numb from gripping the wooden seat. But she didn't complain, not even when the driver had suggested she might want to reconsider this fool's errand back when there was still time to turn around. Clara Whitmore didn't turn around. She never had. Through the small dust-filmed window, she caught her first glimpse of Red Hollow Ranch. It wasn't much to look at. A weathered main house with a sagging porch, a barn that leaned slightly to the left as if tired of standing upright, a scattering of outbuildings that looked like they'd been thrown together from whatever lumber happened to be lying around. The land stretched out in every direction, brown and endless under a merciless summer sun. No trees, no shade, just hard-packed earth and scrub grass that looked like it had given up trying to be green. Not exactly the promised land. But then again, Clara had stopped believing in promised lands a long time ago. The driver climbed down with a grunt, his boots hitting the ground with a solid thud that seemed too loud in the stillness. Everything here was still. No wind, no bird song, just heat rising off the ground in visible waves, making the horizon shimmer like something out of a fever dream. "This is it, ma'am?" the driver called up to her. His tone suggested he thought she was making a terrible mistake. He'd probably thought that about every woman he'd ever delivered to a remote ranch, and he'd probably been right most of the time. Clara gathered her belongings, a single canvas bag that contained everything she owned in the world. 2 dresses, both faded from washing. A spare pair of stockings with careful darns at the heels. A photograph of her mother, dead now these 10 years. A small Bible her father had given her before he died too, leaving her alone at 16 with nothing but debts, and a brother who'd made it clear she was a burden he couldn't afford. She'd learned early that the world didn't owe her anything, that survival meant being useful, being quiet, being willing to accept whatever circumstances offered. She'd worked as a seamstress, a laundress, a cook in a boarding house where the men looked at her in ways that made her skin crawl. She'd saved every penny, dreaming of something different, something of her own. When she'd seen the advertisement in the newspaper, "Rancher seeks honest, hard-working woman for marriage, Wyoming territory," she'd responded the same day. The letters that followed had been brief, practical. Ethan Crowley had written about his ranch, his children who needed a mother, his need for a partner to help build a life in hard country. He'd been honest about the difficulties. She'd been honest about her circumstances. It had seemed like a fair exchange. She'd sold everything she couldn't carry, bought a train ticket west, and tried not to think about the fact that she was traveling toward a man she'd never met, to marry him and raise his children in a place she'd never seen. Now, stepping down from the stagecoach, feeling the hard ground under her feet and the sun beating down on her head like a hammer, Clara felt the first flutter of real fear. What if the letters had lied? What if everything she'd imagined was wrong? What if... The door of the main house opened. A man stepped out onto the porch, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing work clothes dusty from labor. His face was shadowed by the brim of his hat, but she could see the rigid set of his jaw, the way his hands hung at his sides, tense and still. He didn't move toward her, didn't call out a greeting, just stood there, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Clara's heart sank. She'd seen that posture before, in debt collectors, in landlords, in her brother the day he'd told her she had to leave. It was the stance of a man who'd made up his mind about something, and nothing she could say would change it. The driver was already unloading her bag, setting it down in the dust with more care than she'd expected. "You want me to wait, ma'am?" he asked quietly. "Could take you back to town. Wouldn't charge you for it." "No, thank you." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. The driver didn't look convinced, but he touched his hat and climbed back up onto the coach. Within moments, he was gone, and Clara was alone in the yard with her bag at her feet and a stranger on the porch who still hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't done anything to suggest she was welcome here. She picked up her bag and walked toward the house. Each step felt like a test. The sun pressed down on her shoulders. Sweat trickled down her spine. She kept her chin up, her expression calm. Whatever was coming, she would face it with dignity. When she reached the bottom of the porch steps, the man finally spoke. "Who are you?" His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. Not unkind exactly, but not warm either. Just flat, neutral. The voice of a man who'd learned not to waste words. "Clara Whitmore," she said. "I believe you're expecting me." Something flickered across his face. Confusion, maybe. Or recognition. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A letter, she realized. Her letter. The one she'd sent confirming her arrival date. He read it again, as if hoping the words might have changed since the last time he'd looked at it. Then he raised his eyes to hers, and she saw it clearly now. Not anger, but something worse. Resignation, weariness. The expression of a man who'd been dealt another bad hand and was tired of playing. "I didn't send for you," he said. The words hung in the air between them, as solid and immovable as stones. Clara felt the ground shift under her feet, not literally, but in the way your whole world can tilt when you realize everything you'd planned, everything you'd hoped for, was built on sand. She'd given up her room, her job, spent her savings on the journey west. She'd written to no one, told no one where she was going because there was no one left who cared, and now this stranger was telling her it had all been for nothing. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "The letters. I never wrote them." He said it with certainty, but without satisfaction, as if he understood this wasn't her fault, but it wasn't his problem either. "Somebody used my name, played a trick maybe, or made a mistake, but it wasn't me." Clara stared at him, searched his face for deception, and found none. He was telling the truth. She could see it in the tired lines around his eyes, the way his mouth was set in a grim line that suggested he didn't like this situation any more than she did. "I see," she said. And she did see. She saw it all, crystal clear. Someone had written those letters using his name, maybe as a cruel joke, maybe with good intentions, maybe for reasons she'd never understand. But the result was the same. She'd been lured halfway across the country on false pretenses. She was stranded in the middle of Wyoming with no money, no prospects, and no way back. A lesser woman might have cried, might have argued or pleaded or collapsed in despair. Clara did none of those things. She'd survived worse than this. She'd survived her parents' deaths, her brother's rejection, years of scraping by on the edge of destitution. She would survive this too. "I'll leave at dawn," she said. Her voice was calm, matter of fact. She was already calculating in her head. She could walk to town if she had to. It couldn't be more than 15 miles. She could work for food and shelter, save up for a ticket back east. It would take time, but she'd done harder things. The man, Ethan Crowley, she assumed, though he hadn't bothered to introduce himself, stared at her. She could see surprise in his eyes now. He'd expected tears, probably, expected her to make a scene, to beg for his help or his pity. But Clara had learned long ago that tears didn't change anything, that begging only made people uncomfortable, that the world respected strength, even quiet strength, even the strength it took to accept defeat with grace. "Dawn," Ethan repeated, as if testing the word. "Yes. I'll need somewhere to sleep tonight, if that's possible. If not, I can— There's a shed." He jerked his chin toward a small structure beyond the barn. "Used to be storage. It's got a roof and a door that closes. You can stay there." It wasn't an invitation. It was a concession. The bare minimum of human decency, offered without warmth, but also without cruelty. "Thank you," Clara said. He nodded once, then turned and went back inside the house. The door closed behind him with a soft thud that sounded like finality, like the end of something that had never really begun. Clara stood in the yard for a long moment, letting the reality of her situation sink in. Then she picked up her bag and walked toward the shed. It was exactly what he'd said. A storage shed, roughly 10 feet by 10 feet, with a slanted roof and gaps between the boards wide enough to let in slivers of sunlight. There was no furniture, just a dirt floor and the ghost of old feed sacks stacked against one wall. But it was shelter. It was more than she'd had on the stagecoach. She set her bag down and looked around. Someone had swept recently. The floor was clear of debris, and there was an old blanket folded in the corner, thin but clean. A small mercy, probably left by accident rather than kindness. Clara spread the blanket on the ground, sat down, and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to feel the weight of her disappointment. 5 minutes to acknowledge that she'd been foolish to hope, foolish to believe that anything could be simple or easy or exactly as promised. Then she stood up, brushed off her skirt, and began to plan. She had tonight and tomorrow morning. That was all. She would make the most of it. She would present herself as someone useful, someone capable. Not because she expected him to change his mind, she knew better than that, but because it was who she was. Because even in defeat, she maintained her dignity. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, Clara heard voices from the house. Children's voices, high and quick. A girl asking questions, a boy answering in quieter tones. So the letters had been right about that much, at least. Ethan Crowley had children who'd lost their mother based on what the letters had said, children who probably needed someone. But that wasn't her concern. Not anymore. She went to the well she'd spotted near the barn and drew up a bucket of water. It was cool and clear, tasting of minerals and earth. She drank deeply, washed her face and hands, tried to rinse away some of the dust from 3 days of travel. When she returned to the shed, there was a plate on the ground just outside the door. Bread, hard cheese, an apple that had seen better days. Someone had left her dinner without bothering to announce it. Charity without connection. Food, but not welcome. Clara ate slowly, savoring each bite. She'd been hungrier than this before. She'd gone days with less. But the loneliness of it, the sitting alone in a shed while life went on in the house 50 yards away, that was harder to swallow than any stale bread. As darkness fell, she heard the sounds of the household settling for the night. The low rumble of Ethan's voice, stern but not harsh. The children's protests about bedtime, half-hearted and familiar. A door closing. Then silence. Clara lay down on the blanket, using her bag as a pillow, and stared up at the ceiling where stars were visible through the gaps in the boards. She thought about the letters she'd received over the past months, the words about partnership, about building something together. Had they all been lies? Or had someone genuinely thought they were doing good, playing matchmaker from afar? It didn't matter now. What mattered was surviving the night and finding a way forward. She'd done it before. She would do it again. But as sleep finally claimed her, Clara couldn't quite silence the small voice in her heart that whispered, this wasn't fair. That she'd done everything right, everything she was supposed to do, and it still hadn't been enough. The voice was right, of course. Life wasn't fair. She'd learned that lesson over and over again, but knowing it didn't make the ache any easier to bear. Morning came too soon, announced by a rooster that sounded far too enthusiastic about the breaking dawn. Clara woke stiff and sore from sleeping on hard ground, her back protesting as she sat up. Through the gaps in the shed walls, she could see the sky lightening from black to deep blue to pale gold. Dawn. Time to leave. She stood, folded the blanket carefully, and gathered her belongings. Everything she owned fit back into the canvas bag in less than 2 minutes. That was her life now, so small it could be packed away in moments, so portable it left no mark on any place she'd been. When she stepped outside, the ranch was already stirring. She could hear movement in the barn, the low of cattle, the stamp of horses. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, suggesting someone was up and making breakfast. Clara walked to the well, drew water, and washed as best she could. She changed into her other dress, not because it was cleaner, but because it was slightly less wrinkled. Appearances mattered. Even now, especially now, she needed to look like someone who had herself together. She was braiding her hair when a door slammed and footsteps approached. She looked up to see a boy coming toward her, maybe 9 or 10 years old, with his father's dark hair and a face still soft with childhood. He stopped a few feet away, studying her with open curiosity. "You're the lady from the stagecoach," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am," My name is Clara. I'm Jacob. He shifted his weight from foot to foot. Pa says you're leaving. That's right. How come? Did you change your mind? Clara considered her answer carefully. It's complicated, but yes, I'm leaving this morning. Jacob frowned. Mara's going to be disappointed. She was hoping you'd stay. She likes your dress. That's kind of her. Clara finished her braid and tied it with a piece of ribbon. But I think it's better this way. Better for who? The question was so direct, so perfectly childlike in its demand for honesty, that Clara almost smiled. Better for everyone, I hope. Before Jacob could respond, another voice called out from the house. Jacob, breakfast! The boy hesitated, looking torn between obedience and curiosity. Finally he said, You should eat before you go. It's a long walk to town. Then he ran back to the house, leaving Clara alone in the yard. She finished packing, checked that she had everything, and started toward the main house to say goodbye. It seemed like the right thing to do, the polite thing, even if politeness hadn't been extended to her. But before she reached the porch, the door opened and Ethan Crowley stepped out. In the morning light, she could see him more clearly than she had yesterday. He was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s maybe, with a face weathered by sun and hardship, but not yet old. His eyes were gray, she noticed, the color of storm clouds. You heading out? He asked. Yes. I wanted to thank you for the shelter last night. He nodded, uncomfortable with the gratitude. About that, I was thinking, Pa! A small voice interrupted from inside the house. Jacob took my ribbon. Did not. Did too. Ethan's jaw tightened. Excuse me, he muttered, then disappeared back inside. Clara heard the sounds of a domestic dispute being settled with stern efficiency. The children protested, were overruled, and fell silent. When Ethan emerged again, he looked more tired than he had minutes before. Sorry, he said. Where was I? You were thinking something. Right. He cleared his throat. You said you're walking to town. That's 15 miles. You got food? Water? I'll manage. In this heat? Without a hat? He shook his head. You'll be dead before noon. Clara straightened her spine. I appreciate your concern, but I'm not being kind. I'm being practical. His voice was flat, but there was something underneath it. Frustration, maybe. If you collapse halfway there, somebody's going to have to ride out and get you. Might as well save everyone the trouble. It was possibly the least gracious offer of help Clara had ever received, and yet standing there in the morning sun, already feeling the heat building despite the early hour, she recognized it for what it was. Truth. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. What do you suggest? She asked quietly. Ethan studied her for a long moment. She could see him thinking, weighing options, coming to some decision he didn't particularly like but couldn't avoid. You could work, he finally said. For your keep. Few days, maybe a week. Give you time to figure out your next step. Get some money together. Clara's heart jumped, then immediately steadied. This wasn't kindness. This wasn't an invitation to stay. This was a transaction. Labor for shelter. Fair, but not warm. What kind of work? She asked. Whatever needs doing, cooking, mending, cleaning. The kids need... He trailed off, seemed to reconsider. There's always work on a ranch. And in exchange? Food, shelter, $1 a day? He named the sum as if expecting her to argue. Clara did the math quickly. A week's work would give her $7, enough for a ticket back east, with a little left over. It was more than fair. More than she'd had when she'd arrived. And yet accepting felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that she'd been foolish to come here in the first place, foolish to hope for anything more than bare survival. But survival was something, wasn't it? Survival was what she'd always done best. All right, she said. 1 week. Ethan nodded, clearly relieved to have the matter settled. Shed's yours as long as you're here. Meals are at 6, noon, and 6. Don't be late. He turned to go back inside, then paused. One more thing. The kids, Jacob and Mara, they don't need to know about the letters. Far as they're concerned, you're just here to work. Understand? Clara understood perfectly. He didn't want his children getting attached to someone who was leaving. Didn't want them building hopes that would only be disappointed. She could respect that. She'd spent her whole life managing expectations, keeping her heart carefully guarded against the possibility of loss. "I understand," she said. And with that, her position at Red Hollow Ranch was established. Not as a bride, not as a mother, just as a hired hand, temporary and disposable, counting down the days until she could leave this place behind and try to rebuild something resembling a life. It wasn't what she'd hoped for, but it was something. And for now, something was enough. The first day of work began before the sun had fully risen. Clara was up and dressed, her hair neatly braided, her hands already busy when Ethan knocked on the shed door at 5:30. "Morning," he said gruffly. "Come on up to the house. I'll show you around." The interior of the main house was sparse but clean, or at least as clean as a house with 2 children and a working rancher could be. The kitchen was the heart of it, with a large wood-burning stove, a scarred table, shelves holding mismatched dishes and preserved goods. Everything was functional, nothing decorative. This was a place for living, not for show. "Stove's temperamental," Ethan said, demonstrating how to adjust the damper. "Runs hot in the morning, cools down by evening. You'll figure it out. There's eggs in the coop, milk in the cold cellar, bread's in the box there." He pointed to various locations as he spoke, his words clipped and efficient. "Kids eat at 6. I eat whenever there's time." Clara took it all in, mentally cataloging information. "What about preferences? Things the children don't like?" Ethan looked at her as if the question had never occurred to him. "They eat what's put in front of them." "Of course, but surely there are things they prefer." "They eat what's put in front of them," he repeated, firmer this time. Subject closed. Clara nodded and said nothing more. She understood the philosophy, even if she didn't agree with it. Food was fuel, not pleasure. Survival, not comfort. Other chores, there's laundry on Mondays and Thursdays, mending whenever it's needed, house needs sweeping daily, gardens out back needs watering morning and evening. He rattled off tasks like a military commander briefing troops. "You see something that needs doing, you do it. Don't wait to be asked." "Understood." He studied her for a moment, as if trying to decide whether she was really capable of what he was describing. Then he nodded once and headed for the door. "I'll be out with this cattle. If there's an emergency, ring the bell on the porch. Otherwise, don't interrupt." And he was gone, leaving Clara alone in the kitchen of a strange house, surrounded by the evidence of other people's lives. She could see Mara's hair ribbon tied around the handle of a coffee cup, Jacob's slate with half-finished arithmetic problems, a shirt of Ethan's hanging on a peg by the door waiting to be mended. The intimacy of it struck her suddenly. She was standing in the middle of this family's daily life, touching their things, breathing the same air, and yet she was completely separate from them. A ghost passing through, leaving no trace. She shook off the melancholy thought and got to work. By the time Jacob and Mara appeared at 6 o'clock, Clara had eggs scrambled, bread sliced, milk poured into cups, and the table set. The children stopped in the doorway, staring at her with wide eyes. "Good morning," Clara said pleasantly. "Please sit down." Mara, who couldn't have been more than 6, climbed into her chair immediately, still staring. Jacob was more cautious, moving slowly, watching Clara as if she might suddenly transform into something dangerous. "Where's Pa?" Jacob asked. "He's already eaten and gone out to work. It's just us this morning." The children exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Then Mara said in a voice so quiet Clara almost didn't hear it, "Are you going to be our new mama?" Clara's heart clenched. She set down the pan she was holding and knelt beside Mara's chair, bringing herself to the child's eye level. "No, sweetheart. I'm just here to help for a little while. I'll be leaving in about a week." Mara's face fell. "Oh. But while I'm here, I'll do my very best to help your father and take good care of both of you, all right?" It wasn't what the child wanted to hear. Clara could see that clearly. But it was the truth. And Clara had learned long ago that false hope was crueler than honest disappointment. Jacob was watching this exchange with sharp eyes. "Pa said you came on the stagecoach. Where from?" "Illinois. A town called Galesburg." "That's far. Very far. Why'd you come here if you're just going to leave again?" It was a fair question, and one Clara couldn't answer honestly. not without explaining about the letters, the deception, the hope that had been crushed before it could even take root. Sometimes things don't work out the way we plan, she said carefully, but that's all right. We adjust and keep going. Jacob seemed to accept this, or at least stopped asking questions. They ate in relative silence, the children wolfing down their breakfast with the efficient hunger of young animals. When they finished, they looked at Clara expectantly. "What do we do now?" Mara asked. "What do you usually do?" "Pa makes us do lessons." Clara glanced at the slate on the counter. "All right then, lessons it is. Jacob, show me what you're working on." For the next 2 hours, Clara supervised the children's education. Arithmetic for Jacob, letters for Mara. She was surprised by how much she enjoyed it. The quiet focus of teaching, the small victories when Mara successfully wrote her name or Jacob solved a particularly difficult problem. They were good children, she realized. A bit wild around the edges, unused to feminine attention, but fundamentally good. Smart, curious, resilient. Growing up without a mother had made them independent, but it had also left gaps, little holes in their understanding of the world that a mother would have filled with casual care. At noon, Ethan returned for dinner. He was dusty, sweat-stained, and clearly exhausted. He washed at the pump outside, then came in and sat down at the table without a word. Clara served him the stew she'd made from preserved beef and vegetables from the garden. She'd found day-old bread and freshened it in the oven, made coffee the way she'd seen him drink it that morning, black and strong enough to strip paint. He ate mechanically, not tasting, just consuming fuel. The children chattered at him about their lessons, about the snake Jacob had found near the barn, about whether they could have a kitten if one of the barn cats had kittens. Ethan responded with grunts and single syllables, not unkind but not engaged either. Clara watched this and saw a man running on empty, working himself to exhaustion day after day, trying to be father and mother and rancher all at once. Failing at all three because no one person could possibly succeed at that impossible task. She said nothing. It wasn't her place to comment. She was here to work, not to judge. After dinner, Ethan returned to the fields. The children wanted to follow him, but Clara distracted them with the promise of helping in the garden. They weeded companionably together in the afternoon heat, and Clara taught Mara how to tell the difference between vegetable seedlings and weeds, showed Jacob the best way to water without washing away the soil. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind of daily education that happened in families everywhere, except this family had been doing without it. By evening, when Ethan returned again, Clara had supper ready, the house swept, and the children washed and calm. She served the meal, then retreated to eat her own plate in the kitchen, giving the family their space. Through the doorway, she could hear Mara asking her father about her mother. "What was Mama's favorite color, Pa?" A long silence, then, "I don't remember, little one." "Was it blue?" "I think it was blue." "Maybe so." The conversation moved on, but Clara felt the weight of that exchange. The children were forgetting their mother, and Ethan was too exhausted to help them remember. The past was slipping away, leaving them all unmoored. When she finished eating, Clara washed the dishes, banked the fire in the stove, and prepared to return to the shed. But as she reached the door, Mara appeared beside her, holding something small in cloth. "I made this for you," the child said shyly, holding out a crudely sewn handkerchief. The stitches were uneven, the edges crooked, but the effort was unmistakable. Clara's throat tightened. "Mara, this is beautiful. Thank you. It's so you remember us. When you leave." As if Clara could possibly forget. As if this place, these people, wouldn't haunt her for the rest of her life. She knelt down and pulled the little girl into a brief hug. "I won't forget. I promise." When she finally made it back to the shed, Clara lay awake for a long time, staring at the gaps in the ceiling. 1 day down. 6 more to go. She was already dreading the leaving. The days fell into a rhythm. Wake before dawn, start the coffee, begin breakfast. Feed the children, supervise lessons, prepare dinner. Afternoon chores, laundry, mending, gardening, whatever needed doing. Evening meal, cleanup, retreat to the shed. Simple work. Honest work. The kind of labor that left her physically tired but mentally clear. But each day, Clara felt herself becoming more entangled in the life of the ranch. She learned that Jacob was afraid of storms, that Mara had nightmares about being forgotten, that Ethan took his coffee with extra sugar when he thought no one was looking. She learned the ranch's rhythms, the lowing of cattle at dawn, the creak of the windmill turning in the hot afternoon wind, the way the house settled and sighed as it cooled in the evening. She learned, too, that Ethan Crowley was not the cold, unfeeling man he appeared to be. He was just buried under the weight of too many responsibilities, too much loss, too many years of doing everything alone. On the third day, she found him in the barn, struggling to bandage a wound on his arm where barbed wire had caught him. The bandage kept slipping, and he was cursing under his breath with creative variety. "Let me," Clara said, stepping forward before he could refuse. He froze, then reluctantly held out his arm. The cut was deep but clean. It would heal if properly tended. Clara worked quickly, efficiently, cleaning the wound with water from the well, wrapping it with strips torn from an old sheet. Her hands were steady, her movements practiced. She'd done this before, tending to injuries in the boarding house where she'd worked. "You're good at this," Ethan observed. "I've had practice." "Hard life?" "Hard enough." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "The letters, the ones that brought you here. What did they promise you?" Clara tied off the bandage before answering. Partnership, a home, children who needed a mother, honest work building something permanent. And instead you got a week's employment and a storage shed. Yes, seems like a raw deal. I've had worse. Ethan studied her face, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she saw something other than wariness in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or recognition. The acknowledgement of someone who'd survived things that should have broken them. "Who do you think wrote those letters?" he asked. "I don't know. Maybe someone who thought they were helping. Maybe someone who thought you needed—" She trailed off, uncertain how to finish. "A wife?" Ethan supplied. "Because I'm doing such a fine job on my own?" There was no self-pity in his voice, just acknowledgement of fact. "You're doing the best you can," Clara said carefully. "That's all anyone can do." He snorted. "The best I can isn't enough. Kids are half wild, house is falling apart, ranch is barely holding on. My best is failing on all fronts." Clara wanted to argue with him, to point out that his children were fed and safe and growing, that the ranch was still standing despite whatever hardships it faced. But she understood that he wasn't looking for reassurance. He was just stating facts, the way a man might report the weather. "Thank you," he said abruptly, flexing his bandaged arm. "For this." "You're welcome." He turned to go, then paused. "Clara?" "Yes?" "These 6 days you're staying, you don't have to sleep in the shed. There's a spare room in the house, small, but better than—" "The shed is fine," Clara interrupted. She knew what he was offering, and she appreciated it, but accepting would mean crossing a line, becoming part of the household instead of hired help. It would make leaving harder. And she was leaving. That was still the plan. That had to stay the plan. Ethan nodded, understanding even though she hadn't explained. "All right then, offer stands if you change your mind." That night, lying in the shed with Mara's crooked handkerchief clutched in her hand, Clara let herself imagine what it would be like to stay. To wake in that spare room, to make breakfast in that kitchen, not as an employee but as family. To watch Jacob and Mara grow, to help Ethan repair the ranch, to build something permanent together. It was a beautiful fantasy, dangerous precisely because it was so beautiful. She couldn't afford to dream like that. Dreams were for people who had the luxury of hope. Clara Whitmore had learned to live without it. By the 5th day, Clara had fallen completely into the rhythm of ranch life. She knew without thinking which burner on the temperamental stove ran hottest, which floorboards creaked, which direction the barn cat preferred to be scratched. The children came to her automatically with scraped knees and questions about arithmetic. Even Ethan had started seeking her out for small things, asking her opinion on whether a shirt could be mended one more time or needed replacing, mentioning in passing that dinner had been particularly good. They were small gestures, barely noticeable. But Clara noticed them. She noticed everything, storing up memories like a squirrel hoarding nuts for winter. Because soon this would all be over, and memories would be all she had. That afternoon, while the children napped in the heat of the day and Ethan was out checking fence line, Clara decided to tackle the mending pile. It had grown to ridiculous proportions: shirts with missing buttons, pants with torn knees, a dress of Mara's with a ripped hem. She settled in the kitchen where the light was best and began to work. She was halfway through Jacob's third shirt when she heard a rider approaching. Looking out the window, she saw a woman on horseback, middle-aged, sturdy, with sharp eyes and a determined set to her jaw. The woman dismounted and tied her horse to the porch rail with practiced efficiency. Clara opened the door before the woman could knock. "Help you?" she asked. The woman's eyes raked over her, taking in everything: the simple dress, the needle and thread still in hand, the domestic setting. Her expression shifted from curiosity to something harder. "I'm Martha Henderson, from the next ranch over." She said it like Clara should know who that was. When Clara simply waited politely, Martha continued, "I heard Ethan had a woman here. Came to see for myself." "I'm working for Mr. Crowley temporarily," Clara said carefully. "Helping with the house and children." "That what they're calling it these days?" Martha's tone was sharp, accusatory. "Respectable women don't live alone on a ranch with a man they're not married to. Causes talk." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from shame, but from anger. She'd done nothing wrong, nothing improper. And yet here was this stranger, standing on the porch and passing judgment based on assumptions and gossip. "My arrangement with Mr. Crowley is purely professional," Clara said, her voice ice cold. "I sleep in the shed. I work for wages. My conduct has been entirely proper." "Proper?" Martha laughed without humor. "You think anyone's going to believe that? You think people won't talk?" "I think," Clara said carefully, "that people will talk regardless of what I do. In my experience, those determined to see scandal will find it even where none exists." Martha's eyes narrowed. "You've got a mouth on you, I'll give you that. But marks don't lie, girl. A woman in your position. My position is temporary employment, nothing more. I'll be leaving in 2 days." That seemed to surprise Martha. "Leaving? Where to?" "That's my concern, not yours." For a moment, the two women stared at each other, one established and confident in her place in the community, the other rootless and defensive. Then Martha's expression shifted slightly, became almost curious. "What's your name?" she asked, less aggressively. "Clara Whitmore." "You related to the Whitmores back in Nebraska?" "No." Martha studied her a moment longer, then sighed. "Look, I didn't come here to run you off or cause trouble. I came because Ethan Crowley is a good man who's had a hard time of it. His kids need stability, and if you're just passing through—" "I am," Clara confirmed. "Then maybe you should go now, before those children get any more attached." Martha's voice was gentler now, almost kind. "I've seen the way Mara talks about you in town. Miss Clara this and Miss Clara that. She's already halfway to thinking you're staying." The words hit Clara like physical blows. She'd tried so hard to keep appropriate distance, to make her temporary status clear. But children were children. They saw what they wanted to see, hoped what they wanted to hope. "I've been honest with them," Clara said quietly. "Honesty doesn't matter much to a 6-year-old who's desperate for a mother." Martha wasn't wrong. Clara knew she wasn't wrong. But what was the alternative? Leave immediately, abandon the family without warning? That seemed crueler somehow. Before Clara could respond, boots sounded on the porch steps and Ethan appeared, dusty and surprised to find a visitor. "Martha," he said with a nod. "Something I can help you with?" "Just being neighborly," Martha said, her tone shifting to something lighter, less confrontational. "Wanted to meet your new helper. Make sure you weren't being taken advantage of." Ethan's eyes flicked to Clara, reading her expression. She kept her face carefully neutral, but he must have seen something because his jaw tightened. "Clara's been a great help," he said firmly. "Don't know what I'd have done without her this week." "This week?" Martha raised her eyebrows. "She said she's leaving soon. Day after tomorrow. We had an agreement." "I see." Martha looked between them, seemed to make some calculation, then nodded. "Well, I'll leave you to it. Clara, it was interesting to meet you. Ethan, you take care." She mounted her horse and rode off, leaving a wake of unspoken questions and implications. Clara and Ethan stood on the porch, watching her go. Finally, Ethan said, "What did she really want?" to make sure I wasn't ruining your reputation. That's rich, coming from Martha Henderson. He shook his head. Woman's got opinions on everything, and she's not shy about sharing them. She cares about you and the children. I can't fault her for that. Ethan looked at Clara then, really looked at her. She said something that bothered you. It wasn't a question. Clara hesitated, then decided honesty was best. She said Mara's getting attached, that maybe I should leave sooner rather than later, to spare her feelings. Mara's 6. She gets attached to butterflies and rocks. She'll be fine. But Clara heard the doubt underneath his gruff dismissal. He'd been thinking the same thing, worrying about it. I can go tomorrow instead of Sunday, Clara offered. If you think it's better. Ethan's face went hard. We had an agreement. 1 week. You've earned your pay, and then some. I'm not going to shortchange you because Martha Henderson's got ideas. I'm not concerned about the money. I am. His voice was sharp now. I pay my debts. You work through Sunday, then you go with the full week's wages. That's how this works. It was pride speaking, Clara understood. The same pride that kept him standing upright under the crushing weight of responsibility. The same pride that wouldn't let him accept charity or pity or anything that smacked of weakness. She knew that pride. She'd worn it like armor her whole life. All right, she said softly. Through Sunday. He nodded once and went inside, leaving Clara on the porch with the afternoon sun beating down and Martha Henderson's words echoing in her mind. Before those children get any more attached. But what if it wasn't just the children? What if Clara herself was becoming attached to this hard place, these complicated people, this life she'd never meant to lead? What if leaving was going to hurt her more than anyone else? Saturday arrived too quickly. Clara's last full day at Red Hollow Ranch. Tomorrow she would leave, walk to town, buy a ticket back to whatever waited for her in Illinois, which was nothing. Nobody. The same empty rooms and the same struggle to survive. But she'd survived before. She would survive again. That's what she told herself as she went through her final day of chores with mechanical precision. Cook breakfast, supervise lessons, prepare dinner, wash dishes, sweep floors, tend the garden, all the small tasks that made a house a home, perform now with the knowledge that she was doing them for the last time. The children sensed something was wrong. Jacob was quieter than usual, watching her with troubled eyes. Mara clung to her skirts, following her from room to room like a small shadow. Tomorrow's Sunday, Mara said at one point, her voice trembling. You said you'd stay through Sunday. I will be here tomorrow, Clara promised, but then I have to go. Where? Back east, to Illinois. Can we come visit you there? Clara's heart broke a little. That's very far away, sweetheart. Too far for visiting. Then don't go. Mara's eyes filled with tears. Please don't go. We need you. Pa needs you. I heard him tell Uncle James that you're the best thing that's happened to this ranch in years. Clara knelt down, taking the child's small hands in hers. Your father can find someone else. Someone permanent. Someone who... We don't want someone else. We want you. Simple words from a child who didn't understand how complicated the world was, who didn't know about the letters, the deception, the fact that Clara had never really been invited here in the first place. Before Clara could formulate a response that wouldn't make things worse, Ethan appeared in the doorway. Mara, go help your brother with the chickens, he said quietly. But Pa... Now please. The child fled, leaving Clara and Ethan alone in the kitchen. Clara stood, smoothing her skirt, preparing herself for whatever he was going to say. She's not wrong, Ethan said after a long pause. About you being good for the ranch. You'll find someone else. I don't want someone else. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning Clara didn't dare examine too closely. Mr. Crowley, Ethan. After a week of living here, working here, I think you can call me Ethan. Ethan, then. She took a breath. I think we both know this arrangement was always temporary. I appreciate the work, the kindness of giving me time to figure out my next step, but it's time for me to move on. Is it? He moved closer, his gray eyes searching her face. Or are you just running because it's easier than staying? The accusation stung because it held truth. Clara had spent her whole life running, from her brother's house, from failed employment, from any situation that threatened to trap her. Movement equaled safety. Staying meant risking loss. I'm not running, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. You showed up here expecting one thing and got something completely different. Most people would have been angry, would have demanded explanations or compensation. You just accepted it, planned your exit, didn't fight for anything. There was nothing to fight for. You didn't want me here. I didn't know I wanted you here. There's a difference. Clara's breath caught. What are you saying? Ethan ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. I'm saying that whoever wrote those letters, maybe they saw something I couldn't see. Maybe they understood what this place needed better than I did. Your children need a mother. Your ranch needs help. Those are practical problems with practical solutions. I'm just one possible answer, not the only one. You're right, he nodded slowly. But you're also wrong. Because in the past week, I've watched my kids laugh more than they have in 2 years. I've eaten meals that tasted like someone cared whether they were good. I've come home to a house that feels lived in instead of just survived in. That's not just practical help, Clara. That's something else. Don't. Her voice came out as a whisper. Please don't make this harder than it already is. Why not? Why is it hard? If you really want to leave, if you really think there's nothing here for you, then it shouldn't be hard at all. He was right, of course. If she truly believed she didn't belong here, leaving should be simple, clean. But it wasn't, because somewhere in the past week, Clara had started to hope again, started to imagine staying, started to think that maybe, just maybe, this could be real. And hope terrified her more than anything else in the world. I can't stay, she said, forcing firmness into her voice. Even if I wanted to, and I'm not saying I do, it wouldn't work. People talk. Mrs. Henderson made that very clear. My being here unmarried, living on your property, it's improper. It damages your reputation and the children's standing in the community. Then marry me. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Clara stared at him. What? Marry me. Properly. Make this legitimate. Stay. It was possibly the least romantic proposal in the history of human courtship. No flowery words, no professions of love, just a practical solution to a practical problem offered in the same tone he might use to discuss crop rotation or fence repair. And yet Clara's heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape. You don't love me, she said. No, he agreed, but I respect you. I trust you. I've seen you with my children, seen how you work, seen the kind of person you are. That's more than most marriages start with. Marriage should be more than just convenience. Should it? His voice was gentle now, almost sad. My first marriage was love, Clara. Passionate, all-consuming love. And it was good. Sarah was good. But then she died, and love didn't save her, didn't save me, didn't prepare our children for a world without their mother. Love is a luxury. Partnership is survival. Clara understood what he was offering. Not romance, not passion, but something potentially more valuable. Stability. A place. A purpose. A home. Everything she'd spent her life searching for. And yet, I need to think, she said. It's a lot. Ethan nodded. You've got until dawn. After that, you're either staying as my wife or leaving on the morning stage. Your choice. Either way, I'll respect it. He walked out, leaving Clara alone in the kitchen with her thoughts spinning and her heart torn between fear and longing. This was her chance. The thing she'd traveled all this way for, offered now without pretense or deception. A real proposal. A real choice. But was it the right choice? And how could she possibly know? Well, Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat in the shed, watching the stars through the gaps in the ceiling, turning the problem over and over in her mind like a Rubik's Cube with no solution. Stay. Gain a home, a family, a purpose. Risk her heart, risk eventual loss, risk repeating every pattern of disappointment she'd ever known. Leave. Maintain her independence. Protect herself from pain. Return to loneliness, struggle, the endless search for something she might never find. Both choices felt impossible. Both choices felt necessary. As the sky began to lighten with pre-dawn gray, Clara heard footsteps approaching. Quiet, measured steps. Too light to be Ethan's. The shed door opened, and Jacob slipped inside. "You're up early," Clara said softly. "Couldn't sleep." He sat down beside her on the blanket. "Mara cried herself to sleep. She really doesn't want you to go." "I know." "Do you want to go?" Clara considered lying, then decided the boy deserved honesty. "No, but wanting something doesn't always mean it's right to have it." Jacob was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "After Ma died, Pa told us that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing. He meant it was hard but right for us to keep going without her, to not give up." "That's true. But sometimes I think the hardest thing is letting yourself be happy, because being happy means you might lose it someday, and that's scary." Out of the mouths of babes, this 9-year-old boy had just articulated the fear Clara had been dancing around all night. "You're very wise," she told him. "I'm not wise. I'm just tired of being scared." He looked at her with eyes far too old for his young face. "Pa's scared too, I can tell. He's scared you'll say no, but he's more scared of not asking." "He told you about his proposal?" "No, but I heard you two talking yesterday. The walls are thin." Jacob shrugged. "I think you should stay. But not because we need you, even though we do. Because I think maybe you need us too." It was such a simple observation, such a profound truth. Clara had spent so long thinking about what she could offer this family: labor, care, stability. She'd never considered what they might offer her in return. Not just a home, though that was part of it, but also purpose, connection, the chance to matter to someone, to be chosen rather than merely tolerated. Jacob stood up. "Dawn's coming. Paul'll be waiting for your answer." After he left, Clara sat alone in the growing light and made her decision. Not because it was easy, not because she wasn't terrified, but because sometimes, as Jacob had said, the hardest thing and the right thing were the same thing. And it was time Clara stopped running toward safety and started walking toward the possibility of happiness, even if it scared her to death. She found Ethan in the barn, checking on the horses. He looked like he hadn't slept either. His eyes were shadowed, his movements stiff with tension. When he saw her standing in the doorway, he straightened, waiting. Not asking, just waiting for whatever she was going to say. Clara took a breath and stepped forward. "I'll stay," she said, "if the offer's still open." Something in Ethan's face changed, not exactly relief, but a loosening of tension, as if he'd been holding himself rigid against expected disappointment and could finally exhale. "It's still open." "We should be clear about expectations," Clara continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "This is a partnership, like you said, not love. I won't pretend to feelings I don't have, and I don't expect them from you, but I will work hard, care for your children, and do everything in my power to help this ranch succeed. That's all I'm asking. And I need one thing in return." "What's that?" Clara met his eyes directly. "If I ever truly need to leave, if this becomes unbearable, or if I'm making things worse instead of better, you'll let me go. No guilt, no obligation, clean and honest." It was her escape clause, her safety net, the thing that would allow her to take this risk without feeling completely trapped. Ethan considered this, then nodded. "Fair enough, though I don't think it'll come to that." "You don't know me well enough to make that judgment." "Maybe not, but I'm a pretty good judge of character, and I've seen enough this week to know you're the kind of person who keeps their commitments, even the hard ones." It was true, Clara realized. She did keep her commitments, sometimes to her own detriment. But this time, maybe her stubborn persistence would actually build something instead of just prolonging inevitable failure. "So," Ethan said, a hint of awkwardness entering his voice, "I suppose we should make arrangements. There's a circuit preacher due in town next Saturday. We could—" "Ethan," Clara stopped him, "before we plan anything, your children should know. This affects them as much as us. They deserve to be part of the decision." He looked surprised, then thoughtful. "You're right. I hadn't thought— Yeah, let's tell them together." They found Jacob and Mara in the kitchen, picking at their breakfast with obvious lack of enthusiasm. Both children looked up when Clara and Ethan entered, their faces wary. "Kids," Ethan started, then seemed to lose his words. He glanced at Clara for help. She knelt down between the children's chairs, taking a hand from each. "I'm not leaving tomorrow," she said simply. Your father has asked me to stay permanently, as his wife, and I've said yes." For a moment there was absolute silence. Then Mara's face crumpled, not in sadness, but in overwhelming joy, and she launched herself at Clara, nearly knocking her over with the force of her hug. "You're staying? Really, truly staying? Forever and ever?" "Really, truly," Clara confirmed, wrapping her arms around the small body. Jacob's response was more measured, but no less emotional. He looked at his father, then at Clara, then back again. "You promise? You're not just saying that and then you'll leave anyway?" "I promise," Clara said firmly. "I'm staying. This is my home now, and you're my family. If you'll have me—" "We'll have you," Jacob said. Then, in a move that surprised everyone, including himself, he joined the hug, wrapping his arms around both Clara and Mara. Over the children's heads, Clara's eyes met Ethan's. He was watching this scene with an expression she couldn't quite read. Gratitude, maybe, or relief. Or possibly just the exhausted satisfaction of a man who'd been carrying an impossible burden and had finally found someone to help him shoulder it. It wasn't love, what passed between them in that moment, but it was understanding, respect, the beginning of partnership. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it could even grow into something more. Or maybe it would always be just this: two lonely people working together to build something stable and good for the children who depended on them. Either way, Clara had made her choice. She was staying, and for the first time in her life, staying felt like exactly the right thing to do. The days that followed the announcement moved with a strange mixture of urgency and timelessness. There were practical matters to attend to, arrangements to make, decisions to finalize, a wedding to plan, however modest it might be. And yet, underneath all the activity, Clara felt as though she were walking through a dream, half convinced she would wake up back in the shed with her canvas bag packed and the morning stage waiting to carry her away from everything she'd just agreed to. But she didn't wake up. The dream was real, and it required her full participation. The morning after she'd accepted Ethan's proposal, Clara stood in the kitchen making breakfast, as she had every day that week. But this time, the weight of it felt different. This wasn't temporary work anymore. This was her kitchen now, or would be soon enough. These routines she'd learned were becoming permanent patterns, the foundation of a life she was choosing to build. Ethan came in from the morning chores, stopping in the doorway as if uncertain whether the rules had changed overnight. Clara glanced up from the eggs she was scrambling and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "Coffee's ready," she said, nodding toward the pot on the stove. "Thanks." He poured himself a cup but didn't sit down, just stood there, holding it, clearly working up to saying something. Clara waited, giving him space to find his words. "About the sleeping arrangements," he finally said, his voice gruff with discomfort. "Until we're married proper, you should move into the spare room. It's not right, you being out in that shed when there's space in the house." "People will talk either way," Clara pointed out. "At least in the shed there's clear separation. People are going to talk no matter what we do. Martha Henderson made sure of that." His jaw tightened. "But I won't have my future wife sleeping in a storage building like hired help. You move into the spare room today. That's final." There was no anger in his tone, just firm decisiveness. This was clearly something he'd been thinking about, had made up his mind on. Clara recognized the futility of arguing. "All right," she agreed. "Thank you." Ethan nodded and sat down at the table, apparently relieved to have that conversation finished. The children tumbled in moments later, still jubilant from yesterday's news, talking over each other in their excitement. "Can we tell people you're going to be our new mama?" Mara asked, bouncing in her seat. "Can we help plan the wedding?" Jacob added. "Tommy Carson's sister got married last year, and he said there was cake." "There will definitely be cake," Clara promised, smiling despite her nerves. "But let's take things one step at a time. First, we need to go into town and speak with the preacher, make proper arrangements. Can we come?" Mara's eyes were wide with hope. Clara looked to Ethan, who considered for a moment before nodding. "Might as well. Whole town's going to know soon enough anyway." After breakfast, Clara gathered her few belongings from the shed and carried them to the spare room Ethan had mentioned. It was small, as he'd said, barely large enough for the narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk for storage. But it had a real window with glass panes, a door that closed properly, and walls that didn't let in the wind and dust. Compared to the shed, It felt almost luxurious. More than that, it felt like acknowledgement. She wasn't just hired help anymore. She was becoming part of this family, claimed to space inside their walls, inside their lives. Clara set her canvas bag on the bed and unpacked slowly, placing her 2 dresses in the trunk, her mother's photograph on the washstand, her father's Bible on the small shelf above the bed. It took less than 5 minutes to transform the anonymous space into something personal, and the speed of it made her chest ache. This was still everything she owned in the world, so little to show for 26 years of living. But maybe that was about to change. Maybe here, in this small room, in this rough house, on this struggling ranch, she could finally start accumulating something beyond mere survival. Memories, connections, a history that mattered. It's not much. Ethan's voice came from the doorway, making her jump slightly. She hadn't heard him approach. It's more than enough, Clara said honestly. He stepped into the room, looking around with the assessing eye of someone seeing a familiar space through fresh perspective. When Sarah was alive, this was going to be a nursery. We were planning, well, that doesn't matter now. Point is, it's been empty a long time. If you want to fix it up somehow, make it more comfortable, I've got no objection. The offer touched her more than it probably should have. I'll keep that in mind. But truly, I'm fine with it as it is. Ethan nodded, then seemed to force himself to say something he'd been holding back. Look, I know this whole situation is strange, backwards, maybe. Most people court first, get to know each other, then decide about marriage. We're doing it all wrong. Or we're just doing it differently, Clara suggested. There's no rule book that says there's only one right way. Still, I want you to know that I'll do right by you, provide for you, protect you, treat you with respect. You'll have authority in this house as my wife, over the children, the household, all of it. I won't undermine you or make you feel like you're less than equal in this partnership. It was a formal little speech, clearly prepared in advance, and Clara recognized it for what it was, Ethan's version of reassurance. His way of promising to be a good husband, even if he couldn't promise to be a loving one. I appreciate that, she said, and I promise the same. I'll work hard, care for your children as if they were my own, and do everything I can to make this partnership succeed. They stood there for a moment, 2 people making promises about a future neither of them could fully imagine, trying to build something solid out of hope and determination. We should get ready for town, Ethan said finally. Preacher holds office hours on Sunday mornings. If we leave within the hour, we can catch him before services. The ride into town was Clara's first real look at the surrounding country beyond the narrow view from the stagecoach. The land rolled out in endless waves of brown grass and sage, broken occasionally by rocky outcroppings and dry creek beds. It was harsh country, unforgiving, but there was a stark beauty to it that Clara was beginning to appreciate. The wide sky, the sense of space, the way the morning light turned everything golden. Jacob and Mara rode in the back of the wagon, chattering to each other and pointing out landmarks. The twisted tree where they'd once found a hawk's nest, the rock formation that looked like a sleeping giant, the place where Jacob had fallen off his horse and broken his arm 2 years ago. Clara sat beside Ethan on the driver's seat, acutely aware of his presence. The solid warmth of him, the competent way he handled the reins, the comfortable silence that stretched between them. She'd expected awkwardness, but instead there was just a kind of easiness, as if they'd already settled into the rhythm of being together. "What's the town like?" she asked after a while. "Small, maybe 200 people on a good day. General store, saloon, church, blacksmith. Not much else. People are decent for the most part, though they've got their share of gossip and judgment like anywhere." "Are they going to accept me? A stranger marrying into their community?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering. "They'll be curious. Some will be welcoming, some will be suspicious. But you'll win them over eventually. You've got that way about you, quiet and capable. People respect that out here." Clara hoped he was right. She'd never been good at making herself fit into new places, had always been on the outside looking in. But maybe this time would be different. Maybe having Ethan's name and his children's acceptance would be enough to earn her a place in this small frontier community. The town of Red Hollow, named for the ranch or vice versa, Clara wasn't sure, appeared on the horizon like a mirage. A cluster of weathered buildings arranged along a single main street, with scattered houses spreading out from the center like seeds blown by wind. It was smaller than Clara had imagined, more temporary looking, as if the whole place might blow away in a strong enough storm. Ethan drove the wagon to a neat white church at the edge of town, helped Clara down with a courtesy that felt both formal and genuine. The children scrambled out on their own, suddenly shy now that they were in public. The preacher was a thin man in his 50s with kind eyes and calloused hands that suggested he worked a farm between sermons. He greeted Ethan warmly, blessed the children with genuine affection, then turned his attention to Clara with polite curiosity. "Reverend Thompson, this is Clara Whitmore," Ethan said. "We'd like to arrange a wedding for next Saturday, if you're available." The Reverend's eyebrows rose slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Miss Whitmore, welcome to Red Hollow. This is rather sudden, isn't it?" "Yes," Clara said simply, offering no explanation or excuse. "Have you been properly courted? Do your families approve?" "I have no family," Clara said, "and Mr. Crowley and I have come to an understanding that suits us both. We'd like to make it official as soon as possible." Reverend Thompson looked between them, clearly trying to assess the situation. Was this a shotgun wedding, a marriage of convenience, something more troubling? Ethan seemed to sense his concern. "It's not what you're thinking, Reverend. Miss Whitmore came to help with the children and the household. We've decided to make the arrangement permanent. Simple as that." "Nothing about marriage is simple," the Reverend said gently. "It's a sacred commitment, meant to last a lifetime. I'd feel more comfortable if you two spent some time in proper courtship first, got to know each other under appropriate circumstances." "With respect, Reverend, we know enough," Ethan said. His voice was firm but not hostile. "I've seen how she works, how she treats my children, what kind of person she is. She's seen the same of me. We're both going into this with eyes open." "And you, Miss Whitmore?" The Reverend turned to Clara. "Are you entering this marriage freely, without coercion or undue pressure?" Clara met his gaze steadily. "I am. This is my choice." The Reverend studied her face for a long moment. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him because he finally nodded. "Very well. Saturday next, 2:00. But I'll want to meet with both of you beforehand, talk through the vows and the commitment you're making. This isn't something to rush into lightly." "We appreciate that," Clara said. "Thank you, Reverend Thompson." As they left the church, Mara tugged on Clara's skirt. "Does this mean it's really happening? You're really going to be our mama?" "Really, truly," Clara confirmed, smoothing the child's hair with a tenderness that was becoming natural. "Can we go to the store and tell Mrs. Patterson?" Mara asked. "She's always nice to us, and she makes peppermint sticks." Ethan looked reluctant, but Clara touched his arm gently. "We can't hide this. Better they hear it from us than through gossip." He sighed. "You're right. All right, we'll make the rounds. Get it over with." The general store was busy with Sunday morning shoppers, and their entrance caused a ripple of attention. Clara felt eyes on her immediately, assessing, curious, some friendly and some less so. She kept her chin up and her expression pleasant, one hand resting lightly on Mara's shoulder as if the child were an anchor to this community. Mrs. Patterson, a stout woman with flour-dusted hands and a shrewd but not unkind face, came out from behind the counter. "Ethan Crowley, as I live and breathe. And who's this you've brought with you?" "Mrs. Patterson, this is Clara Whitmore. We're to be married next Saturday." The store went absolutely silent. Every person in the building turned to stare, conversations dying mid-sentence. Mrs. Patterson's eyes went wide. "Married? Well, I'll be. How long have you been courting?" "About a week," Ethan said with deliberate understatement. The silence broke into a buzz of whispered conversations. Clara heard fragment, scandal, improper, those poor children, mixed with other voices defending them, saying it was about time Ethan found someone, that the children needed a mother. Mrs. Patterson, to her credit, recovered quickly. She came forward and took Clara's hands in her own. "Welcome to Red Hollow, dear. I hope you'll be very happy here. The children certainly look pleased about it." It was a small kindness, but it meant everything in that moment. Clara squeezed the older woman's hands gratefully. "Thank you. I hope to prove myself a good addition to the community." "I'm sure you will. Now then, you'll be needing supplies for a wedding, won't you? Let me see what I can put together for you." The ice broken, Other people began to approach, some with congratulations, some with thinly veiled questions about Clara's background and intentions. She answered everything with patient honesty, giving just enough information to satisfy curiosity without oversharing. Yes, she was from Illinois. No, she had no family. Yes, she'd been working at the ranch. No, there was nothing improper about the arrangement. Jacob and Mara stayed close to her sides, their presence a kind of endorsement that seemed to sway opinion in her favor. Children were honest judges of character, people reasoned. If Ethan's kids accepted her, she couldn't be all bad. By the time they left the store an hour later, loaded with supplies and well wishes, Clara felt exhausted but cautiously optimistic. She'd survived her first real test of community acceptance. Not everyone would approve, but enough people were willing to give her a chance. "You did well," Ethan said quietly as they loaded the wagon. "That wasn't easy." "No," Clara agreed, "but necessary. Thank you for standing beside me." "Where else would I be? You're going to be my wife. That means we face things together." It was a simple statement of fact, but it warmed something in Clara's chest. Together. She hadn't had together in so long she'd forgotten what it felt like. The ride back to the ranch was quieter, the children worn out from excitement and now dozing in the back of the wagon. Clara watched the landscape roll past and tried to imagine herself here in a year, 5 years, 20. Would she grow to love this harsh land? Would it ever truly feel like home? "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked. "The future. Trying to see it clearly." "Can't ever see the future clearly. Best you can do is make good decisions in the present and hope they lead somewhere worth going." "Is that what you're doing? Making a good decision?" He considered this seriously. "I think so. You're capable, honest, good with the children. That's more than most men could hope for in a wife. The rest, affection, companionship, whatever else marriage might become, that'll come or it won't. But the foundation is solid. That's what matters." Clara supposed he was right, though part of her couldn't help wishing for more certainty, more promise of happiness beyond mere functionality. But wishes were for children. Adults dealt with reality, and the reality was that she and Ethan were building something practical, something that served both their needs. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it was even better than the alternative. Marrying for love and risking the devastation that came when love failed or died. Back at the ranch, they fell into a new rhythm. Clara no longer slept in the shed, but in her small room with the door that closed and the window that let in morning light. She no longer ate separately from the family, but joined them at the table for every meal. Small changes, but they marked her transition from employee to something more. The children adapted quickly to this shift, already calling her Miss Clara instead of just Clara, already running to her first with scraped knees and questions about homework, already treating her like she belonged. Ethan was more cautious in his adjustments. He was unfailingly polite, respectful of her space and her authority over the household. But there was a carefulness to his interactions with her, as if he were handling something fragile that might break if he gripped too hard. Clara understood this. They were both protecting themselves, both wary of crossing invisible lines before they'd figured out where those lines should be drawn. On Wednesday evening, Clara was mending one of Jacob's shirts when Ethan came in from the fields earlier than usual. He washed at the pump, then surprised her by sitting down at the kitchen table instead of immediately heading back outside. "Got a question for you," he said. Clara set down her needle. "All right." "The wedding. Is there anything you want? Specific dress, flowers, particular food? I know it's not going to be fancy, but if there's something that would make it feel more special to you." The question caught her off guard. She'd been so focused on the practicalities, the arrangements, the announcements, the logistics, that she hadn't thought about what she might actually want from her wedding day. "I don't need anything elaborate," she said slowly, "but would it be possible to have wildflowers? Nothing fancy, just something from the land. It would feel more honest that way." Ethan nodded. "I can manage that. Mara would probably love to help gather them. What about a dress?" Clara looked down at her faded work dress. She owned 2 dresses total, both worn thin from years of use. Neither was appropriate for a wedding, even a simple frontier wedding. "I have some money saved from my week's wages," she began. "No." Ethan's voice was firm. "I'll provide for your dress. That's not something you should have to pay for yourself. Ethan, I don't expect so. I know you don't, but I'm doing it anyway. Call it pride if you want, but I won't have people saying I made my wife buy her own wedding dress because I was too cheap to provide one. Clara smiled despite herself. You're a stubborn man. You're just figuring that out? No, just confirming my initial assessment. Something passed between them then. Not quite warmth, but a kind of companionable understanding. They were beginning to learn each other's rhythms, anticipate each other's reactions. It was the start of something, even if neither of them could name what that something was. Over the next few days, wedding preparations consumed the household. Mara and Clara went walking across the ranch lands, gathering armfuls of wild sage flowers and prairie roses. Jacob helped his father repair the front porch, which was looking particularly shabby. Ethan made arrangements with Mrs. Patterson to bake a cake, enlisted a neighbor to play fiddle at the reception. Clara sewed herself a new dress from fabric Mrs. Patterson had helped her choose, a simple design in soft blue cotton that brought out her eyes. It wasn't fancy, but it was new and clean and made with her own hands. That felt right somehow, more honest than anything borrowed or bought ready-made. The Reverend came out to the ranch on Friday evening for the pre-wedding conversation he'd insisted upon. He sat with Clara and Ethan in the front room while the children played outside, asking them questions about their expectations, their understanding of marriage, their commitment to making this work. Marriage requires sacrifice, he told them seriously. Patience, forgiveness, the willingness to put another person's needs alongside your own. Can you both commit to that? Yes, they answered in unison. And what about love? Do you love each other? Clara and Ethan exchanged glances. Finally, Clara spoke. We respect each other. We're committed to building a partnership based on honesty and mutual support. If love comes, it comes. But we're not going into this expecting romance. The Reverend looked troubled. Marriage without love can be a lonely thing. So can life without partnership, Ethan countered. We're both adults, Reverend. We know what we're doing. Reverend Thompson sighed but didn't press further. He walked them through the vows, explained the ceremony, blessed them both with the hope that they would find more than they expected in their union. After he left, Clara and Ethan stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Last night before everything changes, Clara said softly. Changes have already started, Ethan pointed out. Tomorrow just makes them official. Are you nervous? He was quiet for a long moment. Some. You? Terrified, Clara admitted, but determined. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. He turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious in the fading light. Whatever else this is, Clara, I want you to know I'm grateful. You could have walked away from all this, caught that stage and never looked back. But you stayed. That takes courage. Or desperation, Clara said wryly. No, courage. He said it with conviction. Don't sell yourself short. Clara felt her throat tighten with emotion. This was as close as they'd come to real intimacy, not physical, but emotional. A moment of genuine connection beneath all the practical arrangements. Thank you, she said quietly, for giving me this chance. Ethan nodded and they stood in comfortable silence watching the last light fade from the sky. Tomorrow they would marry, bind their lives together with vows and promises. Tonight they were still separate, still uncertain, still protecting their hearts against the vulnerability of hope. But somewhere in the growing darkness, Clara felt something shift inside her. A small crack in the walls she'd built around herself, a tiny opening through which possibility might eventually seep. She was staying. Not just physically, but emotionally. She was choosing to invest in this place, these people, this improbable future. And for the first time since stepping off that stagecoach into the harsh Wyoming sun, Clara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The wedding itself was a simple affair, exactly as they'd planned. Clara woke before dawn on Saturday morning, her stomach tight with nerves, and dressed carefully in her new blue cotton dress. Her hands trembled slightly as she braided her hair, winding it into a neat coronet at the base of her neck. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand and barely recognized the woman staring back. No longer a drifter with nowhere to go, but a bride about to make vows that would bind her to this place forever. The ceremony took place at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the small white church with the entire town of Red Hollow crowded into the pews. Clara walked down the aisle alone. No father to give her away, no family to witness this moment. But Mara had insisted on scattering wildflower petals before her, and Jacob stood beside his father at the altar with solemn dignity. Ethan wore his best shirt, pressed and clean, his hair still damp from washing. When Clara reached him and took her place at his side, he gave her a small nod that might have been reassurance or simple acknowledgement. The Reverend's words washed over them both, familiar phrases about commitment and partnership, honor and faithfulness. Clara spoke her vows clearly, meaning every word even as part of her mind marveled at the strangeness of promising forever to a man she'd known less than 2 weeks. When Ethan slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his mother's ring, he'd told her the night before, the only thing of value his family had owned, Clara felt the weight of it like an anchor, not trapping her but grounding her, giving her something solid to hold on to. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thompson said, and just like that, Clara Whitmore became Clara Crowley. The name felt foreign in her mouth, like wearing someone else's clothes, but she would grow into it. She would make it her own. The reception was held at the ranch, neighbors bringing food and well wishes, the borrowed fiddle player creating music that filled the evening air. Clara danced with Ethan once, stiffly and formally, both of them self-conscious under the watching eyes of the community. She danced with Jacob, too, and even little Mara, who stood on Clara's feet and giggled as they swayed to the music. By the time the last guest departed and the children were finally asleep, exhausted from excitement, Clara found herself alone with her new husband in a house that was now legally hers as much as his. The weight of that reality settled over her like a heavy blanket. Ethan cleared his throat awkwardly. "I'll sleep in the barn tonight. Give you time to settle in, get used to things." Clara appreciated the consideration even as she recognized it for what it was, both of them buying time, postponing the inevitable awkwardness of sharing space as husband and wife. "Thank you. That's thoughtful." He nodded and grabbed a blanket from the back of the sofa. At the door, he paused. "You did well today. Handled everything with real grace." "So did you." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Guess we make a decent team." "I suppose we do." After he left, Clara stood alone in the quiet house and let out a long breath. She was married. Actually married. The impossibility of it washed over her in waves. 2 weeks ago, she'd had nothing, belonged nowhere. Now she had a husband, 2 children who called her mother, a community that had accepted her, however grudgingly. She had a home. The next few weeks passed in a blur of settling into her new role. As Ethan's wife, rather than hired help, Clara found herself with authority over more than just the household. Neighbors sought her opinion on community matters, invited her to join the women's sewing circle, asked her advice on everything from preserving vegetables to treating childhood ailments. She was becoming woven into the fabric of Red Hollow, no longer an outsider, but one of them. The children adapted beautifully to calling her Ma, though Clara noticed they still sometimes said it tentatively, as if testing whether she would correct them or disappear if they claimed her too completely. She made a point of responding every time with warmth and attention, reinforcing that she was here to stay, that their claim on her was real and permanent. Ethan remained careful with her, polite and respectful, but distant. They shared meals and conversation, discussed the children and the ranch, worked side by side on various projects. But there was always a reserve between them, an invisible line neither seemed willing to cross. He'd moved back into the house after the wedding, but kept to his own room, never presuming anything beyond their practical arrangement. Clara told herself she was grateful for this restraint, that it gave her space to adjust, to build her new life without the additional complication of navigating a romantic relationship. But sometimes, late at night when the house was dark and silent, she wondered what it would be like if things were different. If Ethan looked at her with warmth instead of mere respect, if she could reach out and touch him without the gesture feeling weighted with meaning neither of them was ready to acknowledge. But those were dangerous thoughts, and Clara had learned long ago not to want more than what she had. Better to be content with partnership than to yearn for love that might never come. 3 weeks after the wedding, in the scorching heat of mid-August, everything changed. The morning started like any other. Clara woke early and made breakfast while Ethan headed out to check the fence line in the south pasture. The wire had been sagging there for days, and he'd been putting off the repair work until he could carve out a full morning for it. The children helped Clara in the garden, pulling weeds and watering the vegetables that were struggling to survive the brutal heat. By noon, the temperature had climbed to something unbearable. The air shimmered with heat waves, and even the chickens had retreated to whatever shade they could find. Clara made a cold lunch, leftover biscuits and cheese, water drawn fresh from the well, and kept glancing toward the south pasture, expecting to see Ethan riding back. But he didn't come. By 1 o'clock, Clara was starting to worry. By 2, she was actively anxious. Ethan was nothing if not punctual about meals, and he knew how important it was not to overwork in this kind of heat. "Jacob," she said, trying to keep her voice calm, "when did your father say he'd be back?" The boy looked up from the wooden horse he was carving. "He said before noon. Said the heat would be too much after that." Clara's stomach tightened. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones, the same instinct that had kept her alive through years of navigating dangerous situations. She was scanning the horizon when she saw it, Ethan's horse, returning without its rider. The gelding was lathered with sweat, eyes rolling white with panic, and it headed straight for the barn as if seeking refuge. Clara's heart stopped. She ran toward the barn, her skirts hampering her movement, and caught the horse's trailing reins just as it reached the water trough. "Easy, easy," she murmured, running her hands over the animal to check for injuries. There was blood on the saddle, not much, but enough to make her breath catch, and the gelding's knees were scraped raw, suggesting it had fallen or stumbled badly. "Jacob!" Clara called, her voice sharp with command. "Come here, now!" The boy appeared at a run, Mara trailing behind him. When Jacob saw the riderless horse, his face went pale. "Where's Pa?" His voice shook. "I don't know, but we're going to find him." Clara's mind was already racing through possibilities, calculating what she needed to do. "Jacob, I need you to be very brave right now. Can you do that?" The boy nodded, straightening his shoulders. "Good. Take Mara inside. Get her away from the window so she can't see what's happening. Keep her calm. If I'm not back in 2 hours, I want you to ride to the Henderson Ranch and get help. Can you remember all that?" "Yes, ma'am." Jacob's voice was steady despite the fear in his eyes. Clara squeezed his shoulder once, then turned her attention to gathering what she'd need. Rope from the barn, water from the well, strips of clean cloth for bandaging. Her hands moved with swift efficiency, muscle memory from years of making do in crisis situations taking over. She grabbed the horse's reins and swung herself up into the saddle. Not an easy feat in a dress, but Clara had learned early that propriety mattered less than survival. She followed the horse's tracks backward, reading the story they told in the dusty ground. The gelding had been moving at a controlled walk until about half a mile from the ranch. Then something had spooked it into a gallop. The tracks became erratic, churning up the earth in a panic. And there, Clara's heart sank, the unmistakable marks of a fall. The horse had gone down hard, judging by the deep gouges in the dirt. But where was Ethan? Clara urged the horse forward, following the line of broken fence wire that Ethan had been planning to repair. The heat pressed down on her like a physical weight, sweat soaking through her dress, the sun beating mercilessly on her uncovered head. She should have grabbed a hat, should have thought more carefully, but there was no time to go back now. And then she saw him. Ethan lay at the bottom of a shallow ravine, one leg bent at an unnatural angle beneath him. He wasn't moving. Clara's vision grayed at the edges, terror flooding through her, but she forced it down. Panic wouldn't help him. Action would. She dismounted and half slid down the ravine slope, barely keeping her footing on the loose rocks and dry earth. When she reached Ethan's side, she pressed her fingers to his neck, searching for a pulse. For one endless, horrible moment, she felt nothing, and then there it was, weak but steady. He was alive. "Ethan?" She touched his face gently, trying to rouse him. "Ethan, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered, and he groaned, a sound of pure agony that cut through Clara like a knife. "Don't try to move," she said firmly. "You've hurt your leg badly. I need to assess the damage before we do anything else." His eyes opened, unfocused and glazed with pain. "Clara?" His voice was barely a whisper. "What? How did you—" "Your horse came back without you. Now hush and let me work." She ran her hands carefully over his body, checking for other injuries. His left leg was definitely broken. She could feel the wrongness of it even through his pants. There was a gash on his forehead that had bled considerably, and his right shoulder looked dislocated. But nothing else seemed life-threatening, thank heavens for small mercies. The leg was the immediate problem. It needed to be stabilized before they could even think about moving him, and they absolutely had to move him because leaving him here in this heat would kill him just as surely as his injuries. Clara looked around and spotted a dead branch a few feet away, thick enough to serve as a splint. She crawled over and grabbed it, then used her teeth to tear strips from her petticoat. Ethan watched her with hazy eyes, trying to focus through what had to be excruciating pain. "This is going to hurt," Clara warned him. "I'm sorry, but there's no help for it." She positioned the branch carefully alongside his broken leg and began to bind it, pulling the cloth strips tight to immobilize the limb. Ethan's face went white, and he bit down on his lip hard enough to draw blood, but he didn't cry out. When she finished, she sat back on her heels, her own hands shaking with reaction. "All right, that's done. Now I need to get you out of this ravine and back to the ranch." Ethan tried to shake his head and immediately regretted it, wincing. "Can't. Too heavy. Get help." "By the time I get help and bring them back, you could be dead from heat stroke or shock." Claire's voice was flat, brooking no argument. "I'm getting you out of here now. We can argue about whether it was the smart thing to do later." She positioned herself beside him, getting her shoulder under his good arm. "On 3, you're going to push with your good leg, and I'm going to pull. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Ethan pushed and Clara pulled with all her strength, and somehow they managed to get him partially upright. He swayed dangerously, his injured leg dragging useless, and Clara wrapped her arm around his waist to steady him. "Just a little further," she gasped. "The horse is at the top. We'll get you in the saddle and go slow." Getting him up the ravine slope was a nightmare. Every step jarred his broken leg and made him grunt with pain that he was clearly trying to suppress. Clara's muscles screamed with the effort of supporting most of his weight, and more than once they nearly fell. But she kept them moving through sheer force of will, refusing to consider the possibility of failure. When they finally reached level ground, both of them were shaking with exhaustion. Clara left Ethan propped against a rock and went to retrieve the horse, which had wandered a short distance away to crop at some struggling grass. "Come on, boy," she murmured, taking the reins. "Just a little more cooperation and we're done." She led the horse back to Ethan and faced her next impossible task, getting a man with a broken leg into the saddle. In the end, she had to position the horse beside the rock, help Ethan stand on his good leg, and literally shove him upward while he used his remaining strength to pull himself into position. It was graceless and painful, and took 3 attempts, but finally he was mounted, slumped forward over the horse's neck, and breathing hard. Clara swung up behind him, wrapping one arm around his waist to keep him steady. "Hold on," she said. "We're going home." The ride back to the ranch was the longest journey of Clara's life. Every step the horse took jolted Ethan's broken leg, making him gasp with pain. The heat was unrelenting, and Clara could feel him starting to slip in and out of consciousness against her. She talked to him constantly, trying to keep him aware, her voice hoarse from dryness, but never stopping. "Stay with me, Ethan. We're almost there. The children need you. I need you. Don't you dare give up now." When the ranch finally came into view, Clara had never been more grateful to see anything in her life. Jacob must have been watching from the window because he came running out immediately, Mara close behind him despite his obvious attempts to keep her inside. "Pa!" Mara's scream was pure terror. "He's alive!" Clara called out, her voice cracking. "Jacob, I need you to run to the Henderson Ranch now. Tell them we need the doctor from town, fast as he can get here. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am!" Jacob was already running for the other horse before she finished speaking. With Mara's help, the little girl fetching and carrying with wide, frightened eyes, Clara managed to get Ethan down from the horse and into the house. She cleared the kitchen table and helped him onto it, the only surface large enough and sturdy enough to serve as a makeshift examination space. "Mara, sweetheart, I need you to pump water and bring me every clean cloth you can find. Can you be brave and do that for me?" The child nodded and scurried off, clearly grateful to have a task that made her feel useful. Clara cut away Ethan's pant leg to examine the break more closely. It was bad. A compound fracture with bone visible through torn skin. The splint she'd made in the field had prevented it from getting worse, but this was going to need a doctor's expertise. She cleaned the wound as best she could with water and cloth, trying to ignore Ethan's labored breathing and the way his face had gone gray. "You're going to be all right," she told him firmly. "The doctor will be here soon, and he'll set this properly." "Clara." Ethan's hand caught hers weakly. "Thank you. You saved my life." "You'd have done the same for me." "Maybe. But you actually did it." His eyes focused on her face with an intensity that cut through his pain. "You could have just sent Jacob for help, stayed safe. Why didn't you?" Clara looked at him, this man she'd married out of practicality and necessity, this stranger who'd become her husband, and realized the answer was simpler than she'd thought. "Because you're mine to protect now. That's what the vows meant, isn't it? In sickness and health. I wasn't going to leave you lying in that ravine while I waited for someone else to save you." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, pain and gratitude, and something else Clara couldn't quite name. "I chose well," he said softly, "when I asked you to stay." "Rest now," Clara said, her throat tight. "Save your strength for when the doctor gets here." The doctor arrived 2 hours later, a brisk, competent man who took one look at Ethan's leg and whistled low. "You did good work stabilizing this in the field, Mrs. Crowley. Probably saved him from losing the limb." Clara stood back and let the doctor work, keeping the children occupied in the other room while he set the bone and stitched the wound closed. Ethan passed out halfway through the procedure, which was probably a mercy. When it was finally done, the doctor turned to Clara with tired eyes. "He'll heal, but it's going to take time. That leg needs to stay immobilized for at least 6 weeks, maybe longer. He can't put weight on it, can't work. Someone will need to care for him full time." "I will," Clara said without hesitation. The doctor nodded. "I figured as much. You've got the look of someone who doesn't quit. He's lucky to have you." After the doctor left with promises to return in a few days to check on the patient, Clara finally allowed herself to collapse into a chair beside the bed where they'd moved Ethan. Her entire body ached, her dress was ruined with blood and dirt and sweat, and her hands were still shaking with leftover adrenaline. But Ethan was alive. Breathing steadily, sleeping under the influence of the laudanum the doctor had left for pain. He would recover. Clara watched him sleep and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not painfully, but like ice breaking in spring thaw. She'd told herself this marriage was just partnership, just practicality, that she was staying for security, for the children, for a place to belong. She'd been so careful not to want more than that, not to risk her heart on something as uncertain as affection. But somewhere between finding him broken in that ravine and fighting to bring him home, something had changed. The careful distance she'd maintained had shattered under the weight of real fear, real need, real care. She couldn't pretend anymore that this was just an arrangement, couldn't pretend she hadn't been terrified of losing him, couldn't pretend it wouldn't have broken something fundamental inside her if he'd died. When had Ethan Crowley become more than just the man she'd agreed to marry? When had he become someone she couldn't imagine losing? Clara didn't have answers to those questions. She only knew that as she sat there in the gathering darkness, listening to her husband breathe and feeling the steady rhythm of his survival, she understood that she'd made the right choice after all. Not the safe choice, not the practical choice, but the right one. She stayed by his bedside all night, dozing fitfully in the chair, waking at every shift of his breathing. And when morning light finally crept through the windows and Ethan's eyes opened, clear and aware, the first thing he did was search for her face. "You're still here," he said hoarsely. "Where else would I be?" Clara replied. "You're stuck with me now, Ethan Crowley. For better or worse. That's what we promised." And for the first time since she'd known him, Ethan smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his whole face. "Best promise I ever made," he said. Clara felt her own lips curve in response, felt the warmth spreading through her chest like sunrise after a long, dark night. "Mine too," she said softly. "Mine too." The weeks that followed Ethan's accident transformed the household in ways Clara couldn't have anticipated. What had been a careful partnership built on practicality became something else entirely, something forged in the crucible of crisis and tempered by the daily intimacy of caretaking. Ethan proved to be a terrible patient. He chafed against the forced inactivity, grew frustrated with his dependence on Clara for even the most basic needs, and fought against the doctor's orders to stay off his injured leg with a stubbornness that would have been admirable if it weren't so infuriating. "I can make it to the porch on my own," he insisted on the third day of his confinement, trying to lever himself out of bed despite Clara's protests. "You absolutely cannot," Clara said firmly, pressing him back against the pillows with more force than strictly necessary. "The doctor said 6 weeks minimum, and it's been 3 days. If you re-injure that leg trying to prove how tough you are, I'll break the other one myself just to keep you in this bed." Ethan glared at her, but there was something almost like amusement in his eyes. "You threatening your husband, Mrs. Crowley?" "I'm promising him consequences for foolish behavior. There's a difference." "Seems like a fine line to me." Clara sat down on the edge of the bed, her expression softening. "I know this is hard. I know you're used to being active, being in control, managing everything yourself, but your body needs time to heal, and fighting against that will only make it take longer." Ethan's jaw worked as he wrestled with his frustration. Finally, he let out a long breath. "I hate this. Lying here useless while you do everything." "You're not useless. You're healing, and I'm not doing everything alone. Jacob's been wonderful about taking on extra chores, and Mara helps me in the kitchen. We're managing. The fence line needs finishing. The cattle need checking. The hay needs cutting before the weather turns. And all of that will still be there when you're well enough to handle it. The Hendersons have been sending their hired man over twice a week to help with the heavy work. We're not going to lose the ranch because you take the time to heal properly." Ethan looked away, his throat working. "I don't like being indebted to neighbors." "Then consider it an investment in community goodwill that you can repay when someone else needs help. That's how it works out here, isn't it? People helping people because they know their turn will come eventually." The logic was sound, and Ethan couldn't argue with it no matter how much his pride wanted to. He settled back against the pillows with ill grace, and Clara hid her smile as she went to fetch his lunch. The days fell into a new rhythm. Clara would wake early and help Ethan with washing and dressing, a process that mortified him, but which she handled with brisk efficiency that brooked no embarrassment. She would settle him with breakfast and reading material, borrowed books from Mrs. Patterson and old newspapers that neighbors brought by, then turn her attention to running the household and managing the children's education. Jacob had stepped up in remarkable ways, taking on responsibilities far beyond his 9 years. He checked the livestock morning and evening, helped Clara with repairs she couldn't manage alone, and even attempted some of the bookkeeping that Ethan normally handled. Clara watched him grow in confidence and capability, and felt a fierce pride that surprised her with its intensity. Mara, too, had found her role in this new configuration. She appointed herself Ethan's primary companion, sitting by his bedside for hours, reading aloud from her primer, or telling him elaborate stories about the adventures of the barn cats. Her presence seemed to soothe some of Ethan's frustration with his confinement, and Clara often heard him laughing at Mara's dramatic narration of mundane events. But it was the nights that Clara found most challenging. She'd moved into Ethan's room to care for him, sleeping in the chair beside his bed at first, then eventually accepting his gruff insistence that she take the other side of the bed itself, since she was getting no rest in the chair and would make herself sick. Lying beside her husband in the darkness, listening to his breathing, feeling the heat of his body just inches away, it created an intimacy that had nothing to do with physical touch and everything to do with presence. They would talk in those quiet hours, conversations that ranged from practical discussions of the ranch to deeper explorations of their pasts, their fears, their hopes for the future. "Tell me about your mother," Ethan said one night, his voice quiet in the darkness. Clara was silent for a moment, surprised by the question. "What do you want to know?" "Anything. You never talk about your family." "There's not much to tell. She died when I was 16. Consumption took her slowly. My father followed 6 months later. Some said from grief, but I think it was just that he stopped fighting to live. They were very much in love." "And that left you alone?" "With my brother, who made it clear I was a burden he couldn't afford to keep." Clara kept her voice neutral, but couldn't quite hide the old hurt underneath. Ethan was quiet for a moment. His loss became my gain then, though I'm sorry you had to go through that. We all go through hard things. It's what we do with them that matters. What did you do with it? Clara considered this. I learned to survive on my own, to not need anyone, to keep my expectations low so I couldn't be disappointed. She paused. I'm not sure those were the right lessons, but they're the ones I learned. And now? Ethan's voice was soft. What are you learning now? That maybe needing people isn't the weakness I thought it was. That partnership can be strength rather than dependence. That sometimes taking a risk on trusting someone can pay off. She turned her head to look at him in the darkness. You're teaching me that, whether you meant to or not. She felt rather than saw his hand reach across the space between them, finding hers and lacing their fingers together. It was the first time he'd initiated physical contact beyond the necessities of care, and the simple gesture made Clara's breath catch. You saved my life, Ethan said quietly. Not just by pulling me out of that ravine, but by being here, by staying when you could have left, by choosing this even though it was hard and uncertain and probably not what you imagined for yourself. Neither of us got what we imagined, Clara pointed out. But maybe what we got is better. Ethan's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. It is. Better than I deserve, probably. Don't say that. You deserve someone who sees your worth, who appreciates what you're building here, who wants to be part of it. That's all any of us deserve. They fell silent after that, hands still linked between them, and eventually drifted into sleep. When Clara woke in the morning, their hands were still joined, and something in her chest felt lighter than it had in years. 3 weeks into Ethan's recovery, Martha Henderson came calling with news that would change everything once again. She arrived in the late morning, her usual brisk efficiency softened by something that looked almost like sympathy. Clara, dear, might I have a word? Martha settled herself at the kitchen table while Clara poured coffee. I've had a letter from my cousin in Denver. She's opening a small hotel and looking for someone to help manage it, someone capable and trustworthy. The pay is good, and it comes with room and board. When I read the description of what she needed, I thought of you immediately. Clara's hand stilled on the coffee pot. I don't understand. I know how you came to be here, Martha said gently. About the letters, the deception, and while I'll admit I had my doubts about this marriage at first, I've seen how hard you've worked, how well you've cared for Ethan and those children. You've more than proven yourself. Then why? Because you deserve to have choices, Clara. You married Ethan out of necessity, not love. And while you've made the best of it, I wondered if you might want something different, something that's entirely yours, built on your own terms. My cousin's offer is genuine. I could write to her today and you could be in Denver within the month. Independent, with real prospects. Clara sat down slowly, her mind reeling. Independence, a position of her own, the freedom to build a life that wasn't defined by someone else's needs or circumstances. It was everything she'd once dreamed of, offered to her on a silver platter. And she didn't want it. The realization hit her with stunning clarity. Somewhere between saving Ethan's life and caring for him during his recovery, between watching Jacob grow into his responsibilities and listening to Mara's stories, between lying in the darkness talking with her husband about things that mattered, somewhere in all of that, Clara had stopped just surviving and started actually living. This ranch, these people, this life she'd stumbled into by accident had become home in a way nothing else ever had. That's very kind of you, Clara said carefully. And I appreciate you thinking of me, but I'm not interested in the position. Martha's eyebrows rose. You're certain? You don't want to take time to think about it? I'm certain. My place is here. Even though you married Ethan out of necessity rather than affection? Clara met Martha's eyes steadily. What started as necessity has become something else. I can't name it exactly, but I know I don't want to leave it. This is my home. These are my people. I'm staying. Martha studied her for a long moment, then smiled. Good. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. My cousin doesn't actually need help. I made that up. I wanted to see if you'd choose to stay when given a real alternative. Wanted to know if you were here because you had no other options, or because you genuinely wanted to be. Clara felt a flash of irritation. That was manipulative. It was, but necessary. Ethan's been hurt before. His first marriage was so full of love that when Sarah died, it nearly destroyed him. He's been so careful not to let himself care too deeply again, and I needed to know if you were worth the risk of him opening his heart. And what's your verdict? That you're exactly what he needs. Someone strong enough to stand beside him, honest enough to be trusted, and committed enough to stay even when offered an easier path. Martha reached across the table and squeezed Clara's hand. Welcome to the family, dear. Truly. After Martha left, Clara sat alone in the kitchen for a long time, processing what had just happened. She'd been tested and apparently passed, but more importantly, she'd learned something about herself. When given the choice, real choice, not the desperate scramble of necessity, she chose this life. This family. This man who was currently probably trying to get out of bed against doctor's orders because she'd been gone too long. She found him exactly where she expected, sitting on the edge of the bed with his splinted leg extended, trying to figure out how to stand on his own. Don't even think about it, Clara said from the doorway. Ethan looked up, caught in the act, and had the grace to look sheepish. How did you know? Because I know you. Stubborn, prideful, incapable of following simple medical advice. She crossed the room and helped him settle back against the pillows. Besides, you always get restless when I'm gone too long. It's becoming predictable. What did Martha want? Clara hesitated, then decided honesty was always best. She offered me a way out, a job in Denver, independence, a fresh start away from here. Ethan's expression went carefully blank, but Clara saw the flash of pain in his eyes before he could hide it. I see. And are you taking it? No. I told her I'm staying. Because you feel obligated, because I'm injured, and you think, because I want to, Clara interrupted firmly. Because this is my home, and you're my husband, and those children are mine now, just as much as they're yours. Because when I imagine leaving, it feels like tearing out a piece of myself. Is that clear enough for you? Ethan stared at her, something raw and vulnerable in his expression. Clara, I'm not finished. I know we married out of necessity. I know this wasn't some grand romance, but somewhere along the way, necessity became choice, obligation became care, partnership became, she struggled for the right word, became something more. I don't know what to call it, and maybe it doesn't need a name, but I need you to understand that I'm here because I choose to be, not because I have nowhere else to go. Ethan reached for her hand, pulling her down to sit beside him on the bed. I've been trying so hard not to care too much. Not to need you beyond the practical ways, because caring that much, needing someone that deeply, it hurt too much when I lost Sarah. I didn't think I could survive that kind of loss again. So you kept me at arm's length, built walls to protect yourself. Yes, but then I fell off that damn horse, and you came for me anyway. Risked yourself to bring me home. Sat by my bed for days making sure I healed, and I realized the walls didn't matter. You'd already gotten past them without me even noticing. I already cared too much to protect myself. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Is that such a terrible thing? No. Ethan's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. It's terrifying, but it's also the best thing that's happened to me in years. You're the best thing that's happened to me, Clara. Even if you came here by accident and deception, even if neither of us planned this, you're the best thing. Clara leaned into his touch, letting herself feel the full weight of what he was saying. This careful, closed-off man was opening his heart to her, offering her something precious and fragile that could so easily be broken. I'm scared too, she admitted. I've spent so long protecting myself, not letting anyone close enough to hurt me. But you and the children, you've become more important than my fear. I'd rather risk being hurt than live without this. Without you. Ethan pulled her closer, and Clara went willingly, resting her head against his shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, neither speaking, just holding each other and letting the truth of their feelings settle between them like a foundation being laid. When I'm healed, Ethan said eventually, I want to do this right. Court you properly, the way I should have from the beginning. Take you to dinner in town, maybe even to a dance. Show you that you didn't just marry a broken-down rancher with more problems than prospects. Clara smiled against his shoulder. I know exactly what I married, and I wouldn't change any of it. Not even the part where I was an idiot and almost let you slip away? especially not that part. It makes the rest of this sweeter somehow. Knowing we both chose it, both fought for it in our own ways. They were interrupted by the sound of small feet running toward the room, and moments later Mara burst through the door, breathless with excitement. "Ma, Jacob says the Hendersons' hired man brought over a letter for you." She skidded to a stop when she saw them sitting close together, then grinned. "Were you kissing?" Jacob said married people kiss sometimes. Clara felt her cheeks heat, but Ethan just laughed. A real, unguarded laugh that made his whole face light up. "Not yet, little bit, but maybe soon. Now where's this letter?" Mara produced a cream-colored envelope from behind her back, watching with interest as Clara opened it. The letter was brief, written in an elegant hand Clara didn't recognize. "Dear Mrs. Crowley, you don't know me, but I know you. Or rather, I know of you. I'm Elizabeth Crowley, Ethan's cousin from back east. I was the one who wrote those letters that brought you to Wyoming, using Ethan's name without his knowledge or permission. I know what I did was wrong, deceptive, and could have ended very badly. But I'd been watching my cousin struggle for years, trying to manage a ranch and raise 2 children alone, too proud to ask for help, and too broken-hearted to let anyone close. When I met you briefly at a church social in Illinois last year and saw your strength, your capability, your loneliness that matched his, I thought perhaps you might be what he needed. What both of you needed. I'm writing now not to ask forgiveness, which I don't deserve, but to ask if my deception caused irreparable harm, or if perhaps, against all odds, it led somewhere good. I've heard through family connections that you married Ethan, but I don't know if that marriage is one of convenience or something more. I don't know if I've helped or hurt, and the not knowing weighs on my conscience. If my actions caused you pain, I am deeply sorry. But if by some chance they brought you happiness you might not have found otherwise, then I'll bear the guilt gladly as the price of your contentment. Yours in hope and contrition, Elizabeth Crowley." Clara read the letter twice, then passed it to Ethan without comment. She watched his face as he read, saw surprise give way to understanding, and then to something that might have been grudging appreciation. "Well," he said finally, "that explains a lot. Cousin Elizabeth always was one for dramatic gestures and interfering where she wasn't wanted." "Are you angry with her?" Ethan considered this seriously. "I should be. What she did was wrong on just about every level. Could have ended with you stranded and desperate, or me stuck in a terrible marriage, or both of us miserable." He paused. "But it didn't end that way. It ended with you, here, where you belong. So no, I'm not angry. I'm grateful, even if I'll never admit that to her face." Clara smiled and pulled out a piece of paper. "Then I should probably write back and let her know her gamble paid off." She wrote quickly, the words flowing easily now that she knew what she wanted to say. "Dear Elizabeth, your letter arrived today and answered questions I didn't even know I had. Yes, your deception was wrong. Yes, it could have ended terribly, but it didn't. It ended with me finding a home I didn't know I was looking for, a family I didn't dare hope for, a partnership that's become something deeper and more precious than I can adequately express. So while I can't condone your methods, I can thank you for your instincts. You saw something in both of us that we couldn't see in ourselves, and you had the courage to act on that insight. Because of you, I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. Gratefully yours, Clara Crowley. P.S. Ethan says he's not angry, but he also says he'll deny it if you ever mention this letter to anyone." She showed the letter to Ethan, who read it and nodded his approval. Mara, who'd been watching this entire exchange with fascination, piped up with a question. "Does this mean you're happy, Ma? That you're glad you came here, even though it was all mixed up at first?" Clara pulled the little girl close, then reached for Ethan's hand with her free one. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm very happy. This is exactly where I want to be." And as she said it, Clara realized it was completely, utterly true. The fear that had driven so much of her life, the fear of dependence, of loss, of caring too much, had been replaced by something stronger. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to be brave enough to love despite it. She'd come to Red Hollow Ranch expecting nothing and willing to accept whatever scraps of security she could find. Instead, she'd found everything: belonging, purpose, family, and a partnership that was transforming into love with every passing day. The letter from Elizabeth Crowley had given her one final gift: The knowledge that she could leave if she wanted to, that she had choices, options, a way out if this life became unbearable. And knowing she could leave made her choice to stay mean everything. The days grew shorter as summer faded into autumn, and with the changing season came changes to the Crowley household that ran deeper than weather. Ethan's leg healed slowly but steadily, and by the time the first frost touched the ground, he was able to move around with the help of a cane, regaining his independence inch by hard-won inch. But the man who emerged from those weeks of forced confinement was different from the one who'd fallen into that ravine. The walls he'd built around himself had crumbled, and in their place was something Clara had never expected to see. Vulnerability, yes, but also openness. A willingness to let her in, to share the burdens he'd carried alone for so long, to build something together rather than simply existing side by side. The morning Ethan finally walked to the barn without assistance, Clara watched from the kitchen window, with her heart in her throat. He moved carefully, testing his weight on the healed leg, but there was determination in every step. When he reached the barn and turned back to wave at her, the smile on his face was pure triumph. "He did it!" Mara squealed, bouncing beside Clara. "Pa walked all by himself." "He certainly did," Clara agreed, blinking back tears she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just relief at his recovery, though that was part of it. It was seeing him reclaim himself, step by step, knowing she'd been part of that journey. That evening, after the children were asleep, Ethan found Clara on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. He settled beside her with only a slight grimace, his leg clearly stiff from the day's exertion but holding strong. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble, "about what I said before, about courting you properly." Clara turned to look at him, curious. And I'd like to start, if you're willing." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a carved wooden flower, delicate and surprisingly intricate. "Jacob helped me make this while I was laid up. Gave me something to do with my hands besides go crazy from boredom. But I made it for you." Clara took the carved flower, running her fingers over the smooth petals. It was beautiful in its simplicity, clearly made with care and patience. "It's lovely. Thank you." "There's more." Ethan's voice was gruff with nerves. "Saturday, there's a harvest dance in town. I know I can't dance properly yet, but I could take you, sit with you, maybe manage one slow turn around the floor if you're patient with me. Show the whole town that I'm proud to have you as my wife. What do you say?" Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest. This careful, private man was offering to make a public declaration, to claim her openly in front of the entire community. It was a gift more precious than any carved flower. "I'd like that very much," she said softly. The days leading up to the dance were filled with quiet preparation. Clara altered one of her dresses, the blue one she'd worn to their wedding, adding lace trim that Mrs. Patterson had given her and taking in the waist slightly. She'd lost weight during the grueling weeks of Ethan's recovery, and the adjustment made the dress fit like it had been tailored specifically for her. Mara watched the process with fascination, asking 1,000 questions about dances and dresses and whether there would be cake. Jacob pretended indifference, but Clara caught him polishing his father's good boots without being asked, a small gesture of support that made her throat tight. Saturday arrived cool and clear, perfect autumn weather. The children would stay with the Hendersons for the evening, giving Clara and Ethan their first real time alone together since the accident. As Clara helped Ethan into his jacket, he still needed assistance with some movements. She was struck by the domesticity of it all. How natural it felt to smooth his collar, to brush a piece of lint from his shoulder, to share these small intimacies of married life. "You look beautiful," Ethan said, his eyes warm as they traveled over her. "I should have told you that on our wedding day, but I was too caught up in my own head to think straight, so I'm telling you now, you're beautiful, Clara." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you. You clean up fairly well yourself." He laughed and offered her his arm. "Shall we?" The ride into town was comfortable, filled with easy conversation about the children, the ranch, the neighbors. But underneath the casual talk, Clara felt anticipation building. This was their first public appearance as a couple who'd chosen each other, rather than two people trapped by circumstance. It mattered in ways she was only beginning to understand. The dance was held in the largest barn in Red Hollow, decorated with corn stalks and autumn leaves, lit by lanterns that cast warm golden light over everything. Nearly everyone from town and the surrounding ranches had turned out, and the air buzzed with conversation and laughter. A small group of musicians occupied one corner, the borrowed fiddle player from their wedding, plus a man with a guitar and a woman with a surprisingly sweet singing voice. When Clara and Ethan entered, conversation paused for just a moment, that brief hush of collective attention, before resuming with renewed vigor. Clara caught whispers of their names, saw curious glances and knowing smiles. The story of how she'd saved Ethan's life had spread through the community, growing in the telling until Clara barely recognized herself in some of the more embellished versions. Mrs. Patterson bustled over immediately, beaming. "Ethan Crowley, it's good to see you on your feet. And Clara, dear, you look absolutely lovely. That blue brings out your eyes." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. Now you two go enjoy yourselves. There's punch and refreshments on the far table, and the dancing's just getting started. Ethan, don't you dare overdo it on that leg, you hear me?" "Yes, ma'am," Ethan said with good-natured resignation. They made their way through the crowd, stopping frequently as neighbors offered congratulations on Ethan's recovery and welcomed Clara more warmly than they had at the wedding. She was no longer a stranger or a subject of gossip. She was one of them now, proven through crisis and care. Martha Henderson appeared at Clara's elbow, her expression softer than Clara had ever seen it. "I'm glad you came, and I'm glad you stayed, though I suppose you figured out I already knew that." "Your test was unnecessary," Clara said, but without heat. "Though I suppose I understand why you felt it was needed. Ethan's like a brother to me. I had to be sure." Martha's gaze drifted to where Ethan stood talking with a group of ranchers, gesturing animatedly as he told some story. "I've never seen him this happy, not even before Sarah died. There's a lightness to him now that wasn't there before. You did that." "We did it together," Clara corrected gently. "I couldn't have built this alone." Martha smiled and squeezed her arm before moving away to greet other guests. Clara watched the crowd, feeling something settle deep in her chest. Belonging. This was what it felt like to belong somewhere, to be woven into the fabric of a community rather than hovering on its edges. Ethan returned to her side, holding 2 cups of punch. "What are you thinking about?" "How strange life is. 2 months ago I had nothing and no one. Now I have all of this." She gestured to encompass the barn, the people, the life she'd stumbled into. "It doesn't seem real sometimes." "It's real." Ethan set down the cups and took her hand. "And speaking of real, I believe I promised you a dance." "Ethan, your leg can handle one slow dance. Come on, Clara. Let me do this properly." He led her to the floor where other couples were already swaying to a gentle waltz. Ethan pulled her close, one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers, and began to move. His steps were careful, his injured leg clearly limiting his movement, but he managed a slow, swaying rhythm that was almost graceful. Clara followed his lead, acutely aware of how close they were, how his breath stirred her hair, how solid and warm he felt against her. They'd shared a bed for weeks during his recovery, but this was different. This was choice, not necessity. Intimacy offered freely rather than dictated by circumstance. "I need to tell you something," Ethan said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "I've been trying to find the right words for weeks, but there don't seem to be any right words, so I'll just say it plain. I love you, Clara. Not just as a partner or a helpmate, but as a woman, as my wife. I love you, and I wanted you to know." Clara's breath caught. She'd suspected, had seen the evidence in his eyes and his actions, but hearing the words spoken aloud was something else entirely. "Ethan, you don't have to say it back. I know I'm not the easiest man to love, and I know our beginning was all backwards, but I needed you to know how I feel. That this isn't just gratitude or dependence, it's love. Real love." Clara looked up at him, this man who'd been a stranger just weeks ago and was now the center of her world. She saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear that she might not feel the same, that he'd opened himself up only to face rejection. "You stubborn fool," she said softly. "Did you really think I didn't love you back? That I would have fought so hard to save you, cared for you so devotedly, chosen to stay when offered freedom, if I didn't love you?" Hope flared in Ethan's expression. You love me? Of course I love you. I think I started falling in love with you when you offered me work instead of turning me away. When you were honest about what you could offer instead of making false promises. When you trusted me with your children and your home. And I definitely loved you by the time I was dragging you out of that ravine, terrified I might lose you before I'd ever really had you. Ethan pulled her closer, and right there in the middle of the dance floor with half the town watching, he kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and when they finally broke apart, Clara could hear Mrs. Patterson sniffling happily and several people applauding. About time, someone called out, and laughter rippled through the crowd. Ethan grinned, unabashed. Guess the whole town knows now. I suspect they already knew, Clara said. We weren't exactly subtle. They danced 2 more songs before Ethan's leg began to protest, and then they retreated to chairs along the wall where they could watch the festivities and talk. Neighbors stopped by throughout the evening, offering congratulations and sharing stories. The children from town ran wild between the adults, their laughter adding to the general joy. Reverend Thompson approached with a knowing smile. I'm glad to see you both looking so happy. I'll admit, I had my doubts about your marriage when you first came to me, but it seems my worries were unfounded. We took the long way around, Ethan admitted, but we got there in the end. The best marriages often do, the Reverend said. It's not about how you start, but about the commitment you make to keep choosing each other every day. And from what I've seen, you two understand that better than most couples who've been married for decades. After he moved away, Clara leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder. Do you remember what you said at our wedding, about partnership being survival? I remember. You were wrong. Partnership is more than survival. It's joy, connection, growth. It's becoming more than you could be alone. Ethan pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I was right about one thing. You were the best thing that could have happened to this ranch, to those kids, to me. As the evening wore on and the party showed no signs of slowing, Ethan and Clara eventually made their way outside for some air. The night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. They stood together in the quiet darkness, away from the music and laughter, just being together. I have something for you, Ethan said, reaching into his pocket. Was going to wait until we got home, but this seems like the right moment. He pulled out a small iron key, its surface worn smooth with age. Clara took it, confused. What's this? Key to the house. The main door, the one nobody ever uses because we all just come in through the kitchen. Ethan's voice was gruff. I know I gave you a key to your room after the wedding, symbolizing that you had your own space. But I want you to have this one too. Not as a guest or even as a wife who lives there, but as a partner who owns the place just as much as I do. That house is yours, Clara, completely and equally yours. Everything I have is yours. I want you to know that. Clara closed her fingers around the key, feeling the solid weight of it. It was more than just metal. It was a promise, a commitment, a declaration that she belonged here not by sufferance but by right. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. This means more than you know. I think I do know. Because if someone had offered me the same thing when I was drifting alone, it would have meant everything. He took her free hand in his. We're building this together now, equal partners in every way. Your ideas matter as much as mine. Your dreams shape our future just as much as my plans. You're not here to serve my vision. You're here to create something new with me, something neither of us could make alone. Clara stood on her toes and kissed him, putting into the gesture everything she felt: love, gratitude, commitment, joy. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. We should probably get back inside, Ethan said reluctantly, before people start talking. Let them talk. I've spent too much of my life worrying about what people think. Right now, I just want to stand here with you and appreciate everything we have. So they stayed, wrapped in each other's arms under the stars, listening to the distant music and laughter. And Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here, the desperation that had sent her west on a stranger's promise, the disappointment of arrival, the choice to stay despite having every reason to leave. Every step had seemed so uncertain at the time, so fraught with potential disaster, But somehow all those uncertain steps had led her exactly where she needed to be. The weeks that followed the harvest dance were some of the happiest of Clara's life. Ethan courted her with a determination that was both touching and slightly ridiculous given that they were already married and living together. He brought her wildflowers from the fields, carved her small wooden trinkets during the evenings, surprised her with a new dress ordered specially from the catalog that Mrs. Patterson kept at the store. "You know you don't have to do all this," Clara told him one evening as he presented her with a carved bird, perfectly detailed down to individual feathers. "I already married you. You won the prize. Maybe I'm making up for lost time. Maybe I'm enjoying myself, or maybe I just like seeing you smile." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Besides, I figure I owe you about a decade's worth of courtship to make up for skipping straight to marriage. By that logic, you'll be carving me presents until we're both old and gray." Sounds like a pretty good life to me. The children thrived in this new atmosphere of openness and affection. Mara became more confident, less anxious about being forgotten or left behind. Jacob took on more responsibility without being asked, showing maturity beyond his years while still maintaining the playfulness of childhood. They called Clara Ma, without hesitation now, and the word no longer felt tentative or borrowed. It felt earned and true. One evening in late October, as the first snow of the season dusted the ground, the family gathered around the kitchen table for dinner. It was a simple meal: stew made from preserved beef, bread Clara had baked that morning, apples from the barrel in the cold cellar. Nothing fancy, but warm and nourishing and made with care. As they ate, Jacob suddenly spoke up. "Ma, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Are you happy? I mean, really happy? Not just pretending for our sake?" The question caught Clara off guard. She set down her spoon and looked at this perceptive child who saw more than most adults gave him credit for. "Why would you think I might be pretending?" Jacob shrugged, suddenly shy. "Just, you came here by mistake. Nobody meant to trick you, but it happened anyway. And I know you could have left, but you stayed. I just want to make sure you don't regret it, that you're not sad underneath." Clara reached across the table and took his hand. "Jacob, look at me. I am not pretending. I am not sad. I am happier than I have ever been in my entire life, and that's the absolute truth. Yes, I came here by mistake, but sometimes the best things in life are the ones we never planned for. You, Mara, your father, you're the best things that ever happened to me. I wouldn't change a single moment, not even the hard parts, because they all led me here, to this table, with this family, in this home. Do you understand?" Jacob nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I'm glad you stayed." "So am I, sweetheart. So am I." Mara, not to be left out, piped up with her own observation. "I think the letters were magic, like in the stories Pa tells us sometimes. They brought you here when you needed us, and we needed you, and now we're all together like we're supposed to be." "Magic or luck or fate," Ethan said, his hand finding Clara's under the table. "Whatever brought her here, I'm grateful for it every single day." As winter settled in over Red Hollow Ranch, Clara found herself falling into the rhythms of the season with surprising ease. She learned to read the weather signs from Ethan, to know when a storm was coming by the behavior of the animals and the quality of the light. She learned which chores could be done in the cold and which needed to wait for milder days. She learned how to keep the house warm and cozy, even when the wind howled outside and snow piled up against the walls. And through it all, her relationship with Ethan continued to deepen and grow. They were no longer strangers playing at partnership, but genuine partners building something real together. They made decisions jointly about the ranch, the children, their future. They argued sometimes, but fairly and with respect, and they always talked through their disagreements instead of letting resentment fester. The physical intimacy that had been absent from their marriage gradually developed as well, growing naturally from the emotional connection they'd built. Clara no longer slept in the spare room but shared Ethan's bed fully, and the tenderness they showed each other in those private moments was a revelation to them both. "I never expected this," Clara whispered one night as they lay together in the darkness. "Never thought I could feel this complete." "Neither did I," Ethan admitted. "After Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd never feel anything but grief and obligation. But you brought something back to life in me that I thought was dead forever." "What's that?" "Hope, joy, The belief that tomorrow might be better than today instead of just another day to survive. Clara nestled closer, feeling safe and cherished in a way she'd never experienced before. This was what she'd been searching for all along without even knowing it. Not just a place to belong, but people to belong with. Not just shelter, but home. Christmas came, and with it a celebration that filled the house with warmth and light. Clara had never had much use for holidays before. They'd been painful reminders of what she didn't have, of family dinners she wasn't invited to and traditions she didn't share. But this year was different. This year she had children to bake cookies with, a husband to exchange simple gifts with, neighbors who stopped by with well wishes and homemade treats. On Christmas morning, Clara woke to find Ethan already up, stoking the fire to warm the house. He turned when he heard her stirring and smiled that smile that still made her heart skip. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Crowley." "Merry Christmas." She crossed to him, letting him pull her into his arms. "The children will be up soon. Let them sleep a few more minutes. I wanted to give you something first, before the chaos starts." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a delicate silver locket, simple but beautiful. When Clara opened it, she found 2 tiny photographs inside, one of Jacob, one of Mara. "So you can carry them with you always," Ethan said quietly. "And when we add to our family, we'll get a bigger locket. But for now, I wanted you to have this. A symbol of the family you've made, the children who love you, the life we're building together." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "It's perfect. Thank you." She fastened the locket around her neck, feeling the light weight of it settle against her heart. It was such a small thing, but it represented everything: acceptance, belonging, love freely given and gratefully received. The children thundered downstairs moments later, full of excitement about the simple presents Clara and Ethan had managed to gather. A new slate for Jacob, a cloth doll for Mara that Clara had sewn in secret, small treats and treasures that meant the world to children who'd had so little for so long. They spent the day in comfortable domesticity, eating too much, playing games, telling stories by the fire. Neighbors dropped by throughout the day, and the house was filled with laughter and conversation and the warmth of community. As Clara watched it all unfold, saw the joy on her children's faces, felt her husband's arm around her shoulders, heard the friendly voices of neighbors who'd become friends, she was struck by the perfect impossibility of it all. That she'd found this life by accident. That deception and desperation had somehow alchemized into love and belonging. Late that night, after the children were finally asleep and the house had quieted, Clara and Ethan sat together by the dying fire. The locket still hung around Clara's neck, and she touched it occasionally, reassuring herself that it was real. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked. "About how wrong I was. About so many things." "Such as?" "I thought strength meant not needing anyone. I thought safety came from staying separate, from protecting myself by never letting anyone close enough to hurt me. I thought home was a place, just 4 walls and a roof that would shelter me from the world. And now? Now I know that real strength comes from letting yourself be vulnerable with someone you trust. That real safety isn't about walls, but about being with people who will catch you when you fall. And home isn't a place at all. It's the people you choose and who choose you back. It's this. Right here. You and the children and this life we're making together." Ethan pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I was wrong too. I thought I was doing you a favor by offering you work instead of turning you away. Thought I was being noble, giving you a chance when you had nothing. But the truth is, you saved us. You took a broken household and made it whole again. You took a man who'd forgotten how to feel anything but grief and taught him how to love again. You took 2 lost children and gave them back their childhood. We're the ones who should be grateful, Clara, not you. We saved each other," Clara said firmly. "That's what partnership means. Not one person rescuing the other, but both people building something together that neither could create alone." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the embers glow in the fireplace. Outside, snow was beginning to fall again, but inside the house was warm and safe. Clara thought about the shed where she'd spent her first night on this ranch, how far she'd come from that scared, desperate woman with her single canvas bag and her carefully managed expectations. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if those letters had never been written?" Ethan asked. "If you'd never come here?" Clara considered this seriously. Sometimes. I think I would have kept drifting, working whatever jobs I could find, saving what little money came my way, always alone and always looking for something I couldn't name. Eventually, I would have ended up old and worn out with nothing to show for all my years of survival. It wouldn't have been a life, really, just existence. And you're happy with how things turned out, even though it was all a deception at the start? Especially because of how things turned out. Yes, the beginning was based on a lie, but everything after that has been honest. We chose this, Ethan. We chose each other, chose to build something real out of that false start. And that choice, the conscious decision to stay and fight for what we were creating, that matters more than how we began. Ethan nodded slowly. I keep thinking about what I said when you first arrived, that I didn't send for you, that someone made a mistake. I remember. I was wrong. Maybe someone did make a mistake, but it was the best mistake anyone ever made. Because you weren't a mistake, Clara. You were exactly what we needed, arriving exactly when we needed you, even if nobody planned it that way. Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were good tears, happy tears, the tears of someone who'd finally found their place in the world after years of searching. I love you, she said simply. I love this life, these children, this ranch. I love the woman I'm becoming here, stronger and braver and more whole than I ever was before. And I love that we get to keep building this together, day by day, choice by choice. I love you too, Ethan said. And I promise you this, for the rest of my life, every single day, I'm going to make the choice to stay, to fight for this, to be worthy of what you've given me. You'll never have to wonder if I'm committed, if I'm fully here, because I am, Clara, completely and forever. They sealed the promise with a kiss, gentle and sweet, and full of everything they'd built together. And as the fire burned down to ash and the snow continued to fall outside, Clara Crowley, formerly Clara Whitmore, mail-order bride who'd arrived by deception to a ranch that hadn't wanted her, finally understood what it meant to be home. Not because someone gave her shelter, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she'd made the conscious, deliberate choice to claim this place and these people as her own. Because she'd been brave enough to risk her heart on the possibility of happiness. Because when offered freedom, she'd chosen love instead. The rejection that had greeted her arrival had transformed into belonging. The rancher who'd barred the door had become the man who'd given her the key to everything he owned. The desperate need to leave at dawn had become the fierce determination to stay forever. She was exactly where she was meant to be. And for the first time in her life, Clara wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. She was loved, she was home, and no one, not even Clara herself, could ever call that a mistake.